Chapter 844. Yi Guchen did indeed need the Great Sun Dragon Essence Fruit. Yi Guchen was also interested in learning the Three Ultimates' Holy Sword. However, this did not mean that Yi Guchen would go against his conscience and kneel before the Han family's ancestor. That was not the Sword Demon's style. Therefore, Yi Guchen rejected it without hesitation. If he did not have any sage herbs, he could just find another one. It was not necessary for Yi Guchen to learn the Emperor-level sword technique. No one could restrain Yi Guchen with this technique. Descendant, do you know how foolish your decision is? The ancestor's shadow snorted. Although it was only a wisp of soul energy, the pressure it emitted was enough to shake the surroundings. Shenmubai and the others were sent flying. Yi Guchen was the only one who didn't move even though he didn't have any real qi. I cannot agree to your request. If you are willing to hand it over, the Three Ultimates' holy sword will shine in my hands. If you are unwilling, then let it be buried forever. Yi Guchen waved his hand and placed his hands behind his back. With his back facing the Imperial Sword Steel, he walked out. Everyone was stunned. Everyone was stunned. Everyone was shocked. Yi Guchen was probably the only person who could treat the Imperial Sword Tablet with such an attitude. I admire this Duguwubai. I have no choice but to admire him. A sword cultivator clasped his hands and sighed. No matter how foolish Yi Guchen's choice was in their eyes. But at the very least, this boldness was not something an ordinary person could possess. Little brother. You. Han Shan was so anxious that he almost couldn't maintain his bearing as a venerable. He wanted nothing more than to threaten Yi Guchen and force him to agree. However, it was impossible in front of everyone. Li Jingtian and Li Nianyao looked at Yi Guchen with complicated gazes. They did not expect that Yi Guchen would be able to get what they wanted so easily. However, he was still unwilling to agree to the ancestors' request. In comparison, the so-called three supreme talents of the Chu Yin dynasty paled in comparison. Although Shen Mubai's expression was extremely ugly, he was still able to suppress his jealousy. At least, in the end, Yi Guchen did not benefit from it. Just when everyone thought that Yi Guchen would return empty-handed, a wisp of aura suddenly flowed out of Yi Guchen's body. This wisp of aura was very restrained, and no one noticed it. It directly landed on the Han clan's ancestor's body. Rumble. The Imperial Sword Steel trembled once more and rumbled as strands of sword qi suddenly surged out explosively. The illusory figure of the Han clan's ancestor also began to tremble violently, its body rippling like water. What's going on? Everyone was bewildered. Lord Ancestor? Han Shan's expression changed. Then, in front of everyone's incredulous eyes, the phantom of the Han clan's ancestor that floated above the Imperial Sword Steel actually faced Yi Guchen and slowly knelt down. Boom. The moment the phantom of the ancestor knelt down in the air, all the steels in the entire steel-seeking forest exploded at the same time. Countless rocks and stones flew everywhere, and the rubble pierced through the air. Even the Imperial Sword Steel that had stood tall for countless years began to crack, and there were continuous cracking sounds. What's going on? Oh my god. All the steels in the steel-seeking forest exploded, and the phantom of the Han clan's ancestor actually knelt down in front of Duguwubai. The surrounding 300,000 over warriors' eyes almost popped out of their sockets. The scene before them had completely exceeded their imagination. This steel-seeking forest, how could? Han Shan's body trembled, and his lips trembled slightly. The steel-seeking forest was the ancestral land of the Han clan, and at that moment, it was destroyed. What made him even more incredulous was that the phantom of the Han clan's ancestor had actually knelt down in front of Yi Guchen. What did that mean? Everyone from the Han clan was in a state of shock. They had just knelt down in front of the phantom of the ancestor, but the phantom of the ancestor was now kneeling down in front of Yi Guchen. Didn't that mean that the entire Han clan was kneeling down in front of Yi Guchen? At that thought, even Han Shan's expression was not normal, and he felt uncomfortable in his heart. Could it be Senior Su? Seeing this scene, Yi Guchen was a little surprised, but he immediately understood. Su Qingyu's voice rang in Yi Guchen's mind. Haha. A mere wisp of soul energy left behind by a false saint dares to put on airs in front of you? It merely leaked a wisp of my aura. Su Qingyu said with a faint smile. Yi Guqin did not expect the Han clan's ancestor to be a false saint. Even so, it was nothing in front of a true heavenly tribulation saint like Su Qingyu. Strictly speaking, the phantom of the Han clan's ancestor was not kneeling down in front of Yi Guqin, but Su Qingyu, the saint in Yi Guqin's body. A moment later, the imperial sword steel exploded with a loud bang, sending rubble flying into the air. 3 rays of sword light directly entered Yi Guqin's mind and manifested into lines of words. It was the imperial sword art, the triple ultimate holy sword. The triple ultimate holy sword has been given to the fated one. This place no longer needs to exist. The phantom of the ancestor said as he waved his hand. The countless rubble in the steel forest turned into dust and scattered in all directions. The illusory figure itself also dissipated. There was no longer any trace of Daoist rhyme in the mountain range. Everyone's eyes were staring blankly at Yi Guqin. Han Shan's figure flashed, and he landed beside Yi Guqin. He cupped his hands and asked, "Did you obtain the triple ultimate holy sword?" Although everyone had seen the 3 rays of sword light enter Yi Guqin's mind, they were certain. Even so, they weren't too sure. Yi Guqin didn't hide anything and nodded slightly. This nod of his caused the originally noisy mountain range to become completely silent. Only the sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard. "That's great. Haha, it seems like you're really fated with the Han clan. Otherwise you wouldn't have been saved by Xiaokuei." Han Shan laughed. His expression was indescribably warm. Han Xiaokuei was so excited that she jumped 3 feet into the air. Han Ziqiang's delicate body swayed slightly. Her face was deathly pale, and she couldn't even stand straight. She couldn't accept this fact no matter what. On the other hand, Han Lingxian looked deeply at Yi Guqin. Even now, she still didn't understand the ins and outs of the matter. "Dugawubai, that day at the training ground, it was you." Han Lingxian walked gracefully in front of Yi Guqin and asked. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. "As expected, since it was you who taught Lingxian then." When Han Lingxian thought of this, her beautiful eyes turned to Shenmu Bai. Her gaze didn't waver. "Lingxian, listen to me. Maybe this is a misunderstanding. He's just a mortal. How could he?" Shenmu Bai felt extremely guilty under Han Lingxuan's gaze. His back was drenched in cold sweat as he spoke intermittently. "Enough, Shenmu Bai. It seems like my previous opinion of you wasn't biased." Han Lingxuan's tone was extremely cold. Her eyes were filled with disgust. She didn't expect Shenmu Bai to be such a despicable person. When the Han clan elites heard this, they all glared at Shenmu Bai. It turned out that Shenmu Bai had been pretending all along to deceive them. Chapter 845. As the saying went, the higher one stood, the harder one would fall. In the beginning, Shenmu Bai was highly anticipated by everyone. He was even praised to an extremely high position by Han Shan and the elites of the Han family. But now, Shenmu Bai had not performed well at the Imperial Sword Tablet. Even the so-called guidance he gave to Han Lingxian was a lie and an impostor. How could the Han family not hate him? "Uncle Han Shan, it's not like that." Shenmu Bai's face was pale as he tried to explain. "That's enough. The Imperial Sword Tablet has ended. Young Master Shen, you don't have to say anything." Shen Lai was present, so Han Shan would not say anything overboard. However, everyone could hear the coldness in his voice. "Brother Han, this." Shen Lai's expression was unnatural. He had hoped that Shenmu Bai and Han Lingxian would be married. This way, the Han family and the Shen family would be united. Even the imperial family would not be able to do anything about this alliance. But now, everything was ruined by Yi Guqin. Thinking of this, Shen Lai looked at Yi Guqin with a murderous gaze. As if sensing something, Han Shan stood in front of Yi Guqin and said with a serious expression, "Everyone, the Imperial Sword Tablet has ended. Since young Dugu has comprehended the Imperial Sword technique, he should keep his promise. Young Dugu is the son-in-law of the Han family." As soon as he said this, everyone was shocked. No one had expected that Han Shan would actually keep his promise. In order to obtain the 3 ultimate holy swords, he did not hesitate to marry his 3 daughters to Yi Guqin. In an instant, many envious and jealous gazes were fixed on Yi Guqin. They wanted to replace him. Being able to marry one of the three beauties of the Han family was the goal of many young elites in the Yin dynasty. However, Yi Guqin had obtained all three of them. How could they not be jealous? Do I really have to marry him? Han Xiaokui glanced at Yi Guqin and blushed. To be honest, she had never thought of such a thing. But now that she thought about it carefully, she didn't have much resistance. Han Lingxian was silent. She only looked deeply at Yi Guqin, as if she wanted to see through him. On the other side, Li Jingtian shook his head and smiled bitterly. Shen Mubai gritted his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. His body trembled uncontrollably because of his anger. I don't want to. Right at this moment, a sharp and delicate voice suddenly sounded out. Everyone looked over and saw Han Ziqiang's delicate body trembling slightly. She gritted her teeth and said, "Even if Dugu Wubai can comprehend the three ultimate holy swords, so what? This only proves that his comprehension is good. But he doesn't have Zhen Qi or soul power. He's a cripple. I don't want Ziqiang to marry such a cripple." "You. Nonsense." Han Shan shouted coldly. Regardless of whether Yi Guqin was a cripple or not, at the very least, he was now in possession of the three ultimates' holy sword. If Yi Guqin was unwilling to hand over the three ultimate holy swords in a fit of anger, the Han family would suffer a great loss. "Second sister, didn't you say that if big brother Dugu comprehended the imperial sword steel, you would kneel in front of him and apologize?" Han Xiaokui couldn't stand it anymore. Han Ziqiang was speechless. Her face turned green and white. She was speechless. "Uncle, you have to think twice about this," Shen Mubai hurriedly said when he saw this. Han Shan's face darkened. His eyes kept changing. Thinking about it this way, he felt that Han Ziqiang's words were not without reason. In terms of comprehension, Yi Guqin was indeed extraordinary, but he had no cultivation. To be honest, even Han Shan was a little hesitant. Of course, in order to obtain the three ultimate holy swords, Han Shan would naturally not say it. Shen Mubai's eyes flashed coldly. He looked at Yi Guqin and said coldly, So what if your comprehension is high? Only those with true strength are worthy of Lingxian. Do you dare to fight with me?" As soon as he said this, the crowd was in an uproar. Shen Mubai was challenging Yi Guqin to a battle. But in the eyes of the crowd, Shen Mubai was a stage 5 spiritual bridge prodigy, and Yi Guqin was a mortal with no cultivation. No matter how high one's comprehension was, it couldn't be used as martial strength. "That's right, Dugu Wubai. If you dare to accept Big Brother Mubai's challenge, then Ziqiang might think more highly of you." Han Ziqiang also fanned the flames. Han Ziqiang wanted to marry a true prodigy, not a useless person like Yi Guqin. Shen Mubai's suggestion gave her this opportunity. Yi Guqin would have been too ashamed to marry these two sisters if he had retreated in the face of difficulties. To be honest, this is a little too much. Some of the surrounding cultivators secretly discussed. Shen Mubai actually challenged a mortal. This was simply bullying. No matter what, it couldn't be justified. "What, you don't dare? If you can defeat Big Brother Mubai, then Ziqiang will be convinced. Not to mention kneeling down and apologizing. What's wrong with being your slave?" Han Ziqiang raised her proud jade peaks and said provocatively. "Enough!" Han Shan shouted coldly. In his opinion, how could Yi Guqin agree to such a suicidal proposal? Yi Guqin glanced at Han Ziqiang and shook his head slightly. "When we met the blood demon bandits and saw you vomit blood, I knew you were a coward." Han Ziqiang mocked mercilessly. "You're wrong. I never thought of marriage." Yi Guqin shook his head. "Are you looking for a way out?" Han Ziqiang sneered. "But I accept this challenge. In 7 days, I will fight with you." Yi Guqin looked at Shen Mubai indifferently. Since Shen Mubai wanted to humiliate himself, then Yi Guqin could only fulfill his wish. What? Dugu Wubai really agreed? Everyone was stunned, their faces filled with disbelief. In their eyes, even if Yi Guqin had mastered the three ultimate holy swords, it was impossible for him to use it. It was like throwing an egg against a rock. He was overestimating himself. "All right, it's settled then." Shen Mubai's eyes lit up with joy. Although it was 7 days later, it did not make any difference to him. Could it be that Yi Guqin could turn from a mortal to a martial arts expert in 7 days? Big brother Dugu, don't be rash. Han Xiaokui's expression changed. No one doubted Yi Guqin's comprehension. However, no one thought highly of him in terms of martial arts. Little friend Duguyu. Han Shan was also anxious. He was afraid that Yi Guqin would be killed by Shenmu Bai. Don't worry, family head Han. I will give you what you deserve. But the sage elixir? Yi Guqin paused. Don't worry. The Han family still has some credibility. Han Shan patted his chest and guaranteed. Yi Guqin nodded. With the Great Sun Dragon origin fruit, Yi Guqin's physical body could be completely recovered. It was even possible for him to become a 2-star ancient god. At that time, even if he did not use his consciousness C and energy C, Shenmu Bai would not be his match with the power of a 2-star ancient god. Hence, Shenmu Bai's arrogant challenge was just digging a hole for himself. Chapter 846. As the comprehension of the Imperial Sword Steel ended, the shocking news began to spread throughout the Cloud Dynasty. The Imperial Sword Steel, which was said to be the most difficult to comprehend, had been comprehended by a mortal. The impact of such a huge contrast was sensational. But what was more interesting was the battle between Yi Guqin and Shenmu Bai in 7 days. Although everyone thought that the outcome of the battle was already decided, Yi Guqin had comprehended the Imperial Sword Steel, which gave the battle a gimmick. One could imagine that the battle in Tianyuan City in 7 days would attract everyone's attention. Many people wanted to know what kind of courage this mortal genius who had comprehended the Imperial Sword Steel had to accept Shenmu Bai's challenge. In the Han family mansion, in an extremely luxurious courtyard room, Yi Guqin sat cross-legged on the bed. He was wearing a black robe and had returned to his previous attire. Han Shan naturally wouldn't let Yi Guqin be a blacksmith anymore. Even Han Ziqiang had been reprimanded by Han Shan. Han Ziqiang was obviously even angrier at Yi Guqin. But Yi Guqin didn't care about that. The Han family residence in the Cloud Dynasty was only a temporary place for him to stay. Once he recovered his physical cultivation and had the strength to deal with Shenmu Bai, Yi Guqin would leave the Han family residence and head to the Sword Dynasty. After all, the Sword Dynasty was Yi Guqin's goal. Only when he became the Sword Son would he be qualified to participate in the Battle of Prodigies. However, Yi Guqin was unfamiliar with the Sword Dynasty. That was also why he didn't head to the Sword Dynasty directly, and only went there after he recovered his physical body. Only when he had the strength to protect himself could he act more freely in the Sword Dynasty. Thinking of this, Yi Guqin flipped his wrist and took out a fruit. This fruit was crimson in color, and its surface was covered with layers upon layers of patterns that resembled dragon scales. It released a crimson brilliance, and when one touched it, they could feel a burning sensation, as if it was a miniature sun. Is this the Great Sun Dragon Essence fruit? Yi Guqin's eyes glimmered as he sensed the surging sacred medicinal strength contained within the fruit in his hand. Sacred medicine was extremely rare. Even if it was just a low-grade sacred medicine, it would cause countless experts to fight over it. Since Yi Guqin started cultivating until now, the number of sacred medicines that he came into contact with was also very few. Other than the 7-colored jade dragon ginseng and the reversal origin fruit, which he obtained for Su Jianshi and Hundred Flowers' child. Other than the 5 elements sacred fruit, Yi Guqin had also used the ancient Tree of Enlightenment in his Dantian. In terms of value alone, the Tree of Enlightenment was a supreme-grade sacred medicine. This Great Sun Dragon Essence fruit could only be considered low-grade. However, even if it was a low-grade medicine, its medicinal effects would still far surpass that of a top-grade medicine. Yi Guqin, you can now take a preliminary look at the heaven-devouring secret technique recorded in the God Devourer. Perhaps it will help you refine the Great Sun Dragon Essence fruit. Su Qingyu's illusory primordial spirit floated out from the side. That's true. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. As one of the 10 primordial secret techniques, the heaven-devouring secret technique was naturally extraordinary. Yi Guqin's so close, yet worlds apart was derived from one of the 10 primordial secret techniques, the divine movement secret technique. Yi Guqin was also very curious about the power of a complete primordial secret technique. Although his sea of consciousness was still, he could still use a little of his spiritual power. However, he couldn't overuse it. Thinking of this, Yi Guchen closed his eyes and sent his spiritual power into the God-Devourer demonic sword in his dantian. The God-Devourer demonic sword's guard looked like a beast's mouth. Chaotic mist flowed within it like a black hole that could devour everything. There was a primal chaos space hidden within. Yi Guchen's spiritual power entered it, and saw the half of the pure demon body, and the connate purple qi. Yi Guchen planned to integrate the connate purple qi into his doppelganger in the future, so he didn't want to refine it himself. Slowly, Yi Guchen's spiritual power repeatedly scanned the sword. Suddenly, he found that ancient characters vaguely appeared on the God-Devourer demonic sword. It was the cultivation method of the heaven-devouring secret technique. Such ancient characters. I can't understand them. Yi Guchen was slightly speechless. However, this also proved that the heaven-devouring secret technique was indeed inherited in the God-Devourer demonic sword. It's okay. I can recognize it, Su Qingyu said. Subsequently, Yi Guchen finally obtained the cultivation method of the heaven-devouring secret technique. However, after understanding the heaven-devouring secret technique, Yi Guchen's eyes were faintly filled with shock. The heaven-devouring secret technique was indeed one of the 10 primordial secret techniques. The spirit-devouring secret technique that he had cultivated before was almost an infinitely simplified version of the heaven-devouring secret technique. Although it was an infinitely simplified version, there was no comparison at all. The gap between the two was too big. For the spirit-devouring secret technique, the only effect is to devour the surrounding spirit chi of heaven and earth to skyrocket one's cultivation realm. However, this is only a small part of the heaven-devouring secret technique. Yi Guchen was slightly surprised. Although the heaven-devouring secret technique was a secret technique, it was more like a cultivation method that had many auxiliary abilities. Not only could it devour the spirit chi of heaven and earth to skyrocket one's cultivation realm, it could also use the devouring power to refine all kinds of difficult-to-refine sacred medicine, energy, metals, minerals, and so on. It could also use the devouring power as an offensive and defensive means. All in all, the heaven-devouring secret technique almost used the devouring power to the extreme. Of course, in order to use the heaven-devouring secret technique to the extreme, the devouring power of the God-Devourer demonic sword was required. The heaven-devouring secret technique has a total of 5 levels. The devouring effect will skyrocket with each level comprehended. Each level has a unique devouring skill. Yi Guchen muttered to himself. However, in order to truly cultivate the heaven-devouring secret technique, one must at least activate the devouring power of the God-Devourer demonic sword. With Yi Guchen's current strength, it was obviously impossible for him to use it. Although you can't truly cultivate the heaven-devouring secret technique for the time being, you can still use a little bit of the devouring power to refine the Great Sun Dragon origin fruit, Su Qingyu said. Alright, I'll try. Yi Guchen did not hesitate, and began to comprehend the heaven-devouring secret technique. Although the heaven-devouring secret technique was not a sword technique, Yi Guchen had the enlightenment ancient tree. His comprehension was not fast, but it was not slow either. Soon 2 days passed. Yi Guchen slowly opened his eyes. A pair of pitch-black eyes faintly carried a deep and serene look. Begin refining. The Nirvana demonic flame spewed out of Yi Guchen's palm, and melted the Great Sun Dragon origin fruit into a pulp. Then he swallowed it into his body. In an instant, Yi Guchen felt as if he had swallowed a large mouthful of lava. An extremely hot and surging power of the sacred medicine flowed through Yi Guchen's body. His skin immediately turned red from the heat. Ancient God Tactic. Yi Guchen activated the Ancient God Tactic and transformed into his Ancient God form. Even so, Yi Guchen could not suppress the terrifying power of the sacred medicine. His body swelled up like a balloon. Yi Guchen, now is the time to activate the devouring power, Su Qingyu said. Yi Guchen's body shook. A wisp of black devouring demonic chi seeped out from the God-Devourer demonic sword. It turned into a miniature black hole in Yi Guchen's body. Then the surging power of the sacred medicine was absorbed and refined into the purest medicinal power. Chapter 847. The power of the Great Sun Dragon Yuan fruit was overwhelming. Not to mention Yi Guqin. Even a venerable like Han Shan would have to mix it with various herbs, or even refine it into elixir pills. No one was like Yi Guqin, who directly swallowed the whole thing into his body. The violent power of the elixir could almost make a person explode. But Yi Guqin was different. His physical body was too strong. In addition, to break through to 2-star ancient god, he needed the power of the great sun dragon yuan fruit. Hence, he swallowed it directly. If not for the devouring power, Yi Guqin would have to pay a huge risk to refine it completely. But now, with the devouring demonic aura as a black hole, the violent power was refined into the purest elixir. Furthermore, the tempering effect would not be lost because of this. That was the benefit of the devouring power. Any elixir or elixir pills could be refined directly without worrying about any accidents. With the help of the devouring demonic aura, Yi Guqin could refine the great sun dragon yuan fruit safely. The cultivation continued for another 3 days. After 3 days, Yi Guqin finally refined the great sun dragon yuan fruit completely. At that moment, his skin seemed to be flowing with a blazing brilliance like the sun. His blood was surging. Although there was no aura of genuine energy, the power of his physical body was enough to make people tremble in fear. Break! As soon as Yi Guqin finished speaking, his entire body shook violently. It was as if there was thunder rolling in his body. The ancient god's heart that was sealed also released more ancient god's blood to help Yi Guqin's physical body transform. Ancient god light patterns appeared one after another. They were more mysterious and complicated than before. In between Yi Guqin's eyebrows, the second star mark gradually appeared and became solid. Is this the transformation of the ancient god clan? Su Qingyu clicked his tongue in wonder. The 100 tribes were a distant legend. In Nantian region, it was rare to see living creatures of the 100 tribes. At some point in time, the second ancient god star in the space between Yi Guqin's eyebrows completely condensed. In an instant, Yi Guqin's body surged with divine power, releasing boundless divine light and surging power. Seeing this, Su Qingyu waved his hand, causing an invisible barrier to envelop the surroundings, isolating the forceful ripple. Although his primordial spirit didn't have much combat strength, it could still isolate the fluctuations. I've finally broken through. The light faded away, and the divine power was gradually extinguished. Yi Guqin exited his ancient god form. Although Yi Guqin's external injuries had recovered, there were still many scars left behind. But now Yi Guqin's body was sparkling and translucent, perfectly balanced and harmonious. Although there were no bulging muscles, under the well-proportioned body, there was an incomparably terrifying physical strength. After breaking through to 2-star ancient god, my body has become at least 8 times stronger. I can also use ancient god power to perform some ancient god clan martial arts, Yi Guqin murmured. When Yi Guqin was a 1-star ancient god, the only ancient god clan martial art that he could perform was the ancient god spear. But now, after breaking through to 2-star, Yi Guqin could use more techniques. His body could also unleash 8 times his combat strength. It could be said that it was too easy for Yi Guqin to deal with Shen Mubai in his 2-star ancient god state. Finally, I have the ability to protect myself. Yi Guqin was slightly relieved. Without strength, it would be a little uncomfortable no matter what. But now, Yi Guqin already had the ability to roam the Sword Dynasty. As for recovering his Sea of Energy and Sea of Consciousness, in a first dynasty like the Sword Dynasty, there should be a chance to obtain rare items such as sacred medicine and soul crystals. There are still 2 days left. Let's take a look at the 3 ultimate holy swords. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed, and he closed his eyes to comprehend the 3 ultimate holy swords. Although he had given the cultivation method of the 3 ultimate holy swords to Han Shan, he still had a trick up his sleeve. There were 3 moves in the 3 ultimate holy swords: Starbreaker Sword, Moon Sword and Sun Sword. What Yi Guqin gave was indeed the complete version of the 3 moves. He did not lie to Han Shan. But with Yi Guqin's comprehension ability, he had also comprehended the variations of the 3 moves. 2 of them could be combined to form a stronger move. Moreover, only when the 3 moves were combined could the full power of the 3 ultimate holy swords be unleashed. Of course, these were comprehended by Yi Guqin himself. and they were not part of the requirements. He was also not interested in teaching Han Shan everything. After all, Yi Guqin knew the Han family's true colors. A day had passed, and Yi Guqin had a preliminary understanding of the mysteries of the star-breaking sword. Cultivating this kind of emperor-level sword technique could not be rushed, so Yi Guqin let out a sigh and pushed the door open. There was only one day left, and it was the arranged battle with Shen Mubai. Yi Guqin was very relaxed and prepared to adjust his mood. After this battle, he would leave the Han family. However, as soon as he pushed the door open, Yi Guqin saw it. A beautiful figure in a royal blue dress was standing quietly at the door of the courtyard. She had a jade-like face without any makeup, and was as bright as the moon. Her long black hair reached her slender waist. Her curvaceous figure made people unable to stop themselves from lingering. Yi Guqin also understood why this woman was so popular in the Yin dynasty. Her appearance and talent were indeed extraordinary. But Yi Guqin's eyes were very calm. He saw the fallen leaves on Han Lingxuan's shoulder. Han Lingxian had been standing there for a long time. "You've finally come out of seclusion." Han Lingxuan's beautiful eyes lit up when she saw Yi Guqin come out. "How long have you been waiting here?" Yi Guqin asked. "Since you entered," Han Lingxian said with a smile. She did not dare to rashly enter Yi Guqin's residence, so she waited outside. "Miss Han, why are you waiting for me here?" Yi Guqin asked again. "There's still one day left, enough for you to leave. Lingxian still has some celestial crystals, elixirs, and so on. You can leave the Han family directly." Han Lingxian took out a vitality ring. Yi Guqin did not take it and said indifferently, "Why do you say that, Miss Han?" Han Lingxian was slightly taken aback when she saw this and said, "The arranged battle is in one day. I know a little about Shen Mubai's temperament. He will definitely not let you off easily. If you leave now, you can still save your life." Obviously, Han Lingxian was waiting here to make Yi Guqin leave, and not let him participate in the arranged battle. "Miss Han doesn't like me?" Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. "Gongzi Dugu, your talent and comprehension in the sword Dao have indeed surprised Lingxian. It can be said that as long as you can cultivate, you will definitely be a peerless sword Dao genius, but..." Han Lingxian wanted to say something but stopped. However, the meaning of her words was very clear. Yi Guqin was indeed a genius with off the charts. But without martial cultivation, no matter how good his comprehension was, it was useless. He would definitely not be able to defeat Shen Mubai. "Ah, thank you for your concern, Miss Han, but Shen Mubai is not enough to make me run away." Yi Guqin shook his head and laughed. When he was at the Qi refinement stage, he dared to face Gu Xiaoyang at the life and death chamber. At the life and death chamber, he even dared to seriously injure Di Haotian at the divine dwelling stage. If a mere Shen Mubai could make him avoid the battle, it would be too laughable. "Gongzi Dugu." Han Lingxian gently bit her red lips. She was grateful to Yi Guqin for his advice, and did not want to see Yi Guqin fall in the hands of Shen Mubai. But she did not expect that Yi Guqin would not give her any face. "Ah, let's wait and see." Yi Guqin smiled faintly and did not say anything more. Han Lingxuan's eyes were complicated, and she sighed in her heart. Han Lingxian thought to herself, "Even if it's for the sake of giving me some advice, I'll still save his life." Chapter 848. 7 days passed quickly after the incident at the Imperial Sword Tablet. As time passed, the crowd in Tianyuan City showed no signs of slowing down. Instead, it became even more turbulent. This was because the news of Shen Mubai and Yi Guqin's battle had already spread far and wide. Logically speaking, such a battle without any suspense should not cause a commotion. However, after the incident at the Imperial Sword Tablet, Yi Guqin created one miracle after another, shocking everyone. He took out the Tree of Enlightenment and taught Han Xiaokui, causing her to amaze the world. He casually borrowed Han Lingxuan's sword, swept it 3 times, comprehended the Imperial Sword Tablet, and even triggered the ancestor's shadow. The most shocking thing was that the Han clan's ancestor's shadow knelt before Yi Guqin, and gave him an emperor-level sword technique. Even if it happened to Shen Mubai, Han Lingxian, and other geniuses, it would still cause a commotion. Not to mention that the person who created the miracle was just an ordinary person with no cultivation. This was the reason why this battle attracted so many people. They all wanted to know if this ordinary young man who had created a miracle at the Imperial Sword Tablet would shock the world again. Of course, most people did not believe in the so-called miracle. Even if it happened once, could it happen a second time or a third time? It was because of all these reasons that this battle attracted so much attention. The location of the battle was set at the battle arena in Tianyuan City. Yi Guchen walked out of the room in a black robe. His body was thin and straight, and his handsome face was as calm as an ancient well. As soon as he walked out of the courtyard, he saw Han Shan, the three sisters, and the elites of the Han clan waiting for him. Seeing Yi Guchen walk out, Han Xiaokuei ran to Yi Guchen's side anxiously and said with a sobbing tone, "Brother Dugu, why don't we not go and just let it go? You can stay in the Han clan in the future." Han Xiaokuei did not want to see Yi Guchen lose to Shinmu Bai. "That's right, little friend Dugu. If you give up, I can help you put in a good word for you," Han Shan said with a faint smile. Yi Guchen had allowed the Han clan to possess an emperor-level sword technique, but he had not allowed the Shen clan or the imperial family to obtain it. Han Shan felt that he had picked up a great bargain. In addition, even though Yi Guchen did not have any martial arts cultivation, he was gifted in terms of perception. Perhaps he would be of use in the future. Therefore, Han Shan was not stingy in helping Yi Guchen. "I've already made up my mind. There's no need to say anything." Yi Guchen shook his head. Why did everyone think that he would definitely lose? "Haha, third sister, you don't have to do this. Don't you know that heroes don't live forever? If he wants to be a hero, just let him be." Han Ziqiang was very relaxed and said in a strange tone. She wanted to see Yi Guchen cut a sorry figure with her own eyes. Only then would she be able to release her feelings of humiliation. "Let's go." Yi Guchen said no more. He was not bored enough to argue with Han Ziqiang and the others. After that, Yi Guchen and the Han clan went to the arena in Tianyuan City. The Tianyuan arena was located in the center of the city. It was an extremely wide arena. It was also a place for many martial artists to settle disputes and fight. At this moment, the surroundings of the Tianyuan battle arena were filled with people's heads. There was a sea of people, and the noise was endless. The imperial family has already arrived. Some martial artists looked at the arena, and the people sitting high up in the stands. The Cloud Emperor, Li Jingtian, Li Nianyao, and the others were all there. "Father, brother, why do we have to come and watch a battle without any suspense?" Li Nianyao curled her lips and said. She was surprised that Yi Guchen had comprehended the imperial sword steel in the end. At the same time, she was a little unhappy. Why did they, the heavenly talents, not comprehend it, but a mere mortal could? "I have a feeling that this man is not simple." The Cloud Emperor said faintly, "Sister, please be patient. At least we can talk about Shenmu Bai's real situation," Li Jingtian said. After a while, Yi Guchen and the Han clan arrived. The entire martial arts arena was in an uproar almost instantly. Countless eyes fell on Yi Guchen at the same time, looking at him curiously. "That must be Dugu Wu Bai, right? He doesn't have 3 heads and 6 arms. He is indeed immortal. There is not a trace of genuine qi fluctuation on his body. How dare he accept the challenge with courage? I wonder how he comprehended the imperial sword steel. Was it really just luck?" Many people were whispering to each other. But obviously most people were not optimistic about Yi Guchen's chances. After Yi Guchen arrived, he just stood there calmly, waiting for the battle to start. Han Xiaokuei looked worried. Han Lingxian also frowned slightly. She did not understand why Yi Guchen would do something like this, something that was like an egg striking a stone. Only Han Ziqiang crossed her arms in front of her chest, waiting to see Yi Guchen make a fool of himself. While they were waiting, the members of the Shen clan finally showed themselves. "The Shen family is here. Hey, who is the man standing beside Shinmu Bai? Look at his clothes, there is a bronze badge. Could it be?" Everyone's eyes turned to the Shen family. Shen Lai, the head of the family, and Shenmu Bai, needless to say. Next to Shenmu Bai, there was a young man in a purple and gold robe. There was a touch of arrogance in his mouth, looking at the people around him with a condescending gaze. Even when his eyes swept over the Cloud Emperor, there was no sense of fear or awe. The Cloud Emperor frowned slightly, but when he saw the bronze badge on the young man's chest, his eyes narrowed. Hey, who is the man next to Shinmubai? Han Xiaokui asked. The Han family was also puzzled, because they saw that Shinmubai was half a step behind the young man. And there was even a slight hint of respect and flattery on his face. Logically speaking, with Shinmubai's status in the Yun dynasty, there should be no one in the younger generation who could be treated like this by him. Could it be? When she saw the bronze badge on the young man's chest, Han Lingxuan's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she had thought of something. Haha, you have some backbone. Shinmubai glanced at Yi Guqin, and then looked away. It seemed that in his opinion, Yi Guqin was no match for him at all. This battle was just a formality. Everyone, let me introduce you to my good friend who I have invited to watch the battle today. He is from the Sword Dynasty, the Hua family of the Sword Alliance, young Master Hua Tingfei. He is also a bronze badge disciple of Tensei College, one of the 5 major colleges in the Sword Dynasty. Shinmubai shouted loudly, with a smile on his face, as if he was extremely proud and honored. However, when these words came out, it really shocked everyone. What? He is actually the pride of the Sword Dynasty. He is actually the young master of the Hua family. The Hua family is a well-known top Sword Dao family in the Sword Alliance. And this person is actually a disciple of Tensei College. Everyone from the Izumo dynasty was shocked by what they saw. Shinmubai felt even more honored, and there was a hint of a playful smile on his face, staring at Yi Guqin. It seemed to mean that in terms of strength, you are not as good as me, and in terms of connections, you are still not as good as me. Looking at Shinmubai's provocative eyes, Yi Guqin was silent, and thought to himself, I wonder if Brother Kenpo has returned to the Sword Dynasty? Chapter 849. When Yi Guqin first learned about the Sword Dynasty, it was from Kenpo. And what was Kenpo's identity? He was the sword son of the Sword Dynasty. He was equivalent to a prince of a dynasty. Even if he was only ranked 9th among the 13 sword sons, it didn't affect his status. As for the so-called Sword Alliance, he was a young talent of the Hua family. Although Yi Guqin didn't know much about him, he knew that this person's identity couldn't be compared to Kenpo's. Yi Guqin could vaguely sense that Hua Tingfei's strength was around Tiandi Lingqiao's. In that case, Brother Kenpo must have been hiding his strength. Yi Guqin secretly thought. Previously, he sensed that Kenpo's cultivation was only around the 7th stage. But now that he thought about it, with his identity as the Sword Son, it shouldn't be only at the 7th stage. Could it be that the mask has the effect of hiding one's true cultivation? Yi Guqin thought to himself. But now wasn't the time to think about this. In fact, Yi Guqin didn't know much about the Sword Dynasty. But Kenpo vowed to him that as long as Yi Guqin came to the Sword Dynasty, with his talent, it wouldn't be difficult for him to obtain the position of Sword Son. I didn't expect Shinmubai to call such a person to come here. Han Lingxuan's expression didn't look too good. Is there anything special about this person's identity? Yi Guqin asked faintly. Gongzi Dugu hasn't been to the Sword Dynasty, so it's normal that you don't know. The ruler of the Sword Dynasty isn't the imperial family, but the Sword Alliance, a behemoth composed of many Sword Dao families and rogue cultivators. And this Hua family is the top family in the Sword Alliance, with a false saint expert overseeing it. Han Lingxian said. She clearly knew more about the Sword Dynasty than Yi Guqin. I see. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. No wonder the people of the Chu-Yun dynasty were so shocked when Hua Tingfei's identity was revealed. Not to mention the entire Sword Dao alliance, just the Hua family, which had a pseudo-saint expert, was enough to suppress the entire Yun dynasty. Of course, Yi Guqin could tell that Hua Tingfei was not a core disciple of the Hua family. What kind of power is Tensei College? Yi Guqin looked at the bronze badge on Hua Tingfei's chest. The Sword Dynasty is most famous for its 5 great academies. They are known as the gathering places for sword cultivators. Apart from the overlord forces, most of the sword cultivators in the South Horizon region are gathered there. Han Lingxian explained. When Yi Guqin heard this, there was a hint of interest in his eyes. The 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty. Interesting. Of course, people like Di Haotian, Gu Xiaoyang, Jun Xiaoyao, and Yi Songyue were all geniuses of the overlord forces. Naturally, they would not lower themselves to join the Sword Dynasty's academies. But apart from these geniuses of the overlord forces, the rest of the sword cultivators in the South Horizon region would probably choose the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty as a place to cultivate. One could imagine how many sword cultivators would gather in the 5 great academies. It was no wonder that the Sword Dynasty had such strength and was ranked first among the 100 great dynasties. Lingxian will also go to the Sword Dynasty soon to see if there is a chance to cultivate in the 5 great academies. Han Lingxian said with a hint of yearning in her beautiful eyes. She turned to stare at Yi Guchen. With Yi Guchen's monstrous comprehension, he would probably cause a stir in the 5 great academies. Unfortunately, it's just cultivation. Han Lingxian sighed inwardly. It was too cruel for a swordsman to have monstrous talent, but no cultivation. But Yi Guchen's eyes were faintly shining. He also wanted to see how powerful the sword cultivators of the 5 great academies were. Brother Shen, is this your opponent? Or did I see wrongly? Isn't he just a mortal? Hua Tingfei glanced at Yi Guchen with a careless smile on his face. He relied on his identity and background. In this dynasty, almost no one dared to provoke him. Brother Hua, you don't know. Although this person is a mortal, he has some skills. Shen Mubai's face was cold as he told him about the imperial sword steel. Shen Mubai, Han Shan glared fiercely. This Shen Mubai had no scruples. If Hua Tingfei wanted to take away the imperial sword technique of the Han family, Han Shan would be in big trouble. This time, even Han Ziqiang, who had always admired Shen Mubai, had an unnatural expression on her face. Shen Mubai's action was a bit of a trap for the Han family. Oh, so that's how it is. He only has comprehension, but he's just a mortal. Hua Tingfei's mouth twitched in disdain. Seeing that Hua Tingfei did not seem interested in the imperial sword technique of the Han family, Han Shan secretly sighed in relief. But thinking about it, with the Hua family's foundation, how could they not have an imperial sword technique? Brother Shen, I'll give you 15 minutes to deal with this person. Then, invite these ladies to a small gathering. Hua Tingfei's lips curled into a playful smile as he stared at the 3 sisters of the Han family. The 3 beauties of the Han family each had their own style. Han Xiaokui was lively and playful, while Han Ziqiang was charming and charming. Han Lingxian did not need to be mentioned. Even in Hua Tingfei's Tensei College, such a beautiful girl was rare. Hua Tingfei's gaze was like a snake as he scanned Han Lingxuan's delicate body. His gaze lingered on her slender waist for a moment, and the smile on his lips widened. Han Lingxuan's beautiful eyes hid her disgust, but she did not dare to open her mouth to scold him, because it might bring disaster to the Han family. Facing the Hua family of the Sword Dao Alliance, not to mention the Han family, even the entire Cloud Dynasty could not afford to offend them. Seeing this, Yi Guchen took a step forward and stood in front of Han Lingxian. It was not that he was being kind, or that he was interested in Han Lingxian. It was that Han Lingxian knew how to repay kindness. Previously, she had kindly advised him to leave. Yi Guchen admired her character. She looked at Yi Guchen, who was standing in front of her without hesitation, and did not say anything. Han Lingxuan's heart skipped a beat. She actually felt a sense of security from Yi Guchen. You. Hua Tingfei's eyes darkened. A mortal without any aura of cultivation dared to hinder him? Alright, Dugu Wubai, since you want to die, I will fulfill your wish. Come up and accept your death. Shen Mubai stomped on the ground, his figure leaping towards the arena. He was dressed in white, and his body was full of true qi, forming a cyclone around him. His aura was impressive, and it gave off a sense of oppression. He is indeed one of the top 3 prodigies. The surrounding warriors exclaimed, compared to Shen Mubai's aura. On the other hand, Yi Guchen slowly stepped onto the battle arena. He was still like a mortal, without any aura. Comparing the two, the difference in aura was too great. Sigh. Han Shan and the rest shook their heads. Yi Guchen had already lost in terms of aura, not to mention other things. Heh. Now I have to admire your courage to accept death. Shen Mubai's attitude was condescending as he sneered. Yi Guchen stood with his hands behind his back, expressionless as he spoke slowly. Cut the crap. If I can't defeat you in 3 moves, I will give you my head. Chapter 850. If I can't defeat you in 3 moves, I'll give you my head with both hands. Yi Guqin spoke in an indifferent tone. His voice was like a thunderclap that reverberated in the ears of all the martial artists present. If he couldn't defeat Shen Mubai in 3 moves, he would end his own life? Not to mention Yi Guqin. Even Han Lingxian and Li Jingtian, who were also the top 3 prodigies, did not have the slightest confidence that they could defeat Shen Mubai. As for defeating him in 3 moves, that was even more ridiculous. What a joke. I thought that Dugu Wubai was at least a smart person since he was able to comprehend the Imperial Sword Tablet. Who would have thought that he would be so stupid? That's right. He's just a mortal. Even if he fails, it's admirable that he has the courage to challenge Shen Mubai. However, his arrogant words are displeasing. Many of the martial artists present snorted. Originally, they had admired Yi Guqin's courage. However, Yi Guqin's arrogance made them very disgusted. Since when could a mortal without any martial arts cultivation be so condescending towards a prodigy of the martial arts? Ah, interesting. What an interesting mortal. Hua Tingfei's eyes were also filled with disdain. Arrogant and conceited. Han Ziqiang was even more disgusted with Yi Guqin. Being weak didn't mean anything, but if he was still so arrogant, then it was annoying. Big brother Dugu. Han Xiaokui knew Yi Guqin's character well. He would never boast. Since he said that, he naturally felt that it was a very normal thing. Xiaokui, you've interacted with young Master Dugu the most. Does he really have such confidence? Even Han Lingxian found it hard to believe that Yi Guqin could defeat Shen Mubai in 3 moves. After all, that was something that even she could not do. Big brother Dugu is definitely not the kind of person who thinks too highly of himself. If he says he can do it, then he can do it. Han Xiaokui was extremely certain. Ha 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 ha, Dugu Wubai, you've succeeded in making me laugh. As expected of a clown, you still don't forget to play to the gallery. Since that's the case, let me expose your pathetic lies. Shen Mubai sneered, too lazy to even draw his sword. He casually struck out with his palm, looking extremely carefree. He wanted to crush Yi Guqin with a single palm strike in the most elegant manner possible. In Yi Guqin's eyes, a dark light surged as ancient god power flowed through his veins. He also punched out, colliding with Shen Mubai's palm. Has he given up on himself? He actually didn't even use his martial arts? Many people were stunned when they saw this scene. They then shook their heads and sighed. Shen Mubai casually attacked because he had the strength to do so. Yi Guqin, on the other hand, only threw out a simple punch. That was not a wise move. Oh, how ignorant. This person's arm will definitely be broken by Brother Shen. Hua Tingfei sneered. Obviously, he was somewhat bothered by the fact that Yi Guqin had blocked in front of Han Lingxian. Crack. Accompanied by the scalp-numbing sound of bones cracking. Everyone present felt as if their bones had been broken. As expected, Hua Tingfei smiled proudly. However, before the smile on his face could completely spread, he heard a familiar scream. That scream was like a pig being slaughtered. It was incomparably mournful and shook everyone's eardrums. This voice did not come from Yi Guqin's mouth. It came from Shen Mubai, whose face was distorted. His figure retreated rapidly, coughing up blood from the corner of his mouth. His entire left arm looked as if it had been crushed by a huge rock. Many white bone spurs pierced out from under his skin. It was obvious that his entire left arm had been crippled by Yi Guqin in an instant. There was a dead silence between heaven and earth. It was as if the air had stopped flowing. Only the violent heartbeat could be heard. What did they just see? A mortal had sent the famous Shen Mubai of the Chu Yin dynasty flying with a single punch, and crippled his left arm. Many people swallowed their saliva dryly, their eyes filled with disbelief. After a long while, the uproar caused by the extreme shock and absent-mindedness spread out in all directions like a tide. Tell me this is not true. This is crazy. Is Dugu Wubai really immortal? An earth-shattering clamor shook the entire Tianyuan martial arena. The 3 sisters of the Han family were all stunned. Han Lingxian and Han Xiaokui's beautiful faces were filled with astonishment. Han Ziqiang's face was pale. Her delicate body trembled slightly, and she could not believe her eyes. Even the Cloud Emperor, Han Shan, and the other honorables of the Heavenly Palace could not hide their astonishment. Damn it, how dare you hurt my son? Xinlai's aura exploded. Xinlai, stop. Do you want to break the promise of the battle? Cloud Emperor said. If they could use this battle to suppress the Shen family's reputation, it would be best for the imperial family. How can it be? Impossible, I don't believe it. Shen Mubai covered his crippled left arm with one hand, and his eyes were bloodshot. The heart-wrenching pain made his handsome face contort slightly. An extremely strong unwillingness appeared in Shen Mubai's eyes. He did not believe it. Myriad Spirit Seal. Shen Mubai once again displayed one of the Shen family's lower-grade imperial martial arts. Terrifying true energy rolled in his right palm, and it immediately turned into a huge milky white seal. It seemed to have the power to suppress mountains and rivers, and it rushed toward Yi Guqin. He wanted to kill Yi Guqin with one blow. Feeling the powerful fluctuation of Shen Mubai's move, the martial artists present were slightly shocked. This move was not something an ordinary genius could withstand. Maybe Shen Mubai was careless and did not display his skills. This time Duga Wubai is finished. Some martial artists speculated. However, most of the spectators remained silent. After all, Yi Guqin's physical strength had already surprised them. When Yi Guqin saw Shen Mubai's killing move coming, he did not hesitate to activate the ancient god tactic. His body grew to 9 feet tall, and the ancient god light runes covered his entire body. Between his eyebrows, 2 resplendent star imprints appeared. This meant that Yi Guqin's physical strength was 8 times stronger than before. Yi Guqin raised his hand and grasped the void. Bright golden light surged and gathered into a golden spear. It was the ancient god clan's martial arts, the ancient god spear. Although Yi Guqin had not recovered his sea of energy and sea of consciousness, he could use the ancient god power to activate the ancient god clan's unique skill. Boom! Yi Guqin threw the spear into the void, and it pierced through the void toward Shen Mubai. The fluctuation seemed to be able to penetrate everything in the world, and it caused the void to ripple with golden light. Boom! The ancient god spear collided with the spiritual seal, and there was a violent fluctuation. Then, all the spectators on the spectator stand looked on in disbelief. Crack! Without much collision, the ancient god spear directly broke through the spiritual seal, and pierced through Shen Mubai's shoulder, causing him to cough up blood again. He was in a sorry state. No. How is this possible? What kind of power is that? Shen Mubai roared. His hair was disheveled, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He had completely lost his handsome demeanor, and he looked like a gambler who had lost a bet. There is one last move. Shen Mubai's eyes were filled with blood-red anger. He immediately drew out his sword. It was a supreme-grade divine weapon with mystical runes. At the same time, he used a powerful emperor-level sword skill from the Shen family, along with his sword essence of rain. Sword essence of rain, fatal blow of rainy night. Chapter 851. Endless anger and humiliation flooded Shen Mubai's heart. He no longer held back and took out his sword. At the same time, he performed the sword essence of rain and his trump card, the rainy night final blow. Rumble. The vigorous genuine energy of the 5th level heaven and earth spiritual bridge burst out from Shen Mubai's body. In an instant, the entire Tianyuan martial arts arena seemed to have darkened. The heavy rain poured down. Everyone was shocked to discover that every single drop of rainwater seemed to contain sword chi that caused their hearts to palpitate. Shen Mubai is going to perform his trump card. It's the rainy night final blow. I'm afraid that even Han Lingxian and Li Jingtian can't take it easily. Seeing Shen Mubai's powerful aura, all the martial artists' faces changed. Even Hua Tingfei's face revealed a strange expression. Even he was slightly surprised by the power of this move. However, as Hua Tingfei's follower, the stronger Shen Mubai was, the more respect Hua Tingfei would have. Now it should be over. Hua Tingfei smiled. Oh no. Han Lingshuan's face changed color. As one of the 3 supreme talents, Han Lingxian naturally knew that this move was Shen Mubai's trump card. It would be difficult for her to take it. Yi Guqin's performance just now was surprising. However, it was only the power of his physical body. Just as Han Lingxian was about to help, Han Shan stopped her. No one can interfere in the fight between the two of them, Han Shan said in a deep voice. But Han Lingxian clenched her hands. Sister Lingxian, trust brother Dugu. Although Han Lingxian was also worried, she believed in Yi Guqin. Dugu Wu Bai Dai. Shen Mubai's eyes were blood red as he slashed out with his sword. The surrounding rainwater, together with the terrifying sword energy that tore through the air, pierced towards Yi Guqin. The rain that filled the sky swept out with Shen Mubai's sword. One could imagine just how powerful it was. In the face of Shen Mubai's fatal blow, Yi Guqin's face turned solemn. If he was at his peak, Shen Mubai's sword would not be a threat. However, Yi Guqin's body was incomplete, and he could only use his physical strength and ancient god power temporarily. Even so, it was enough. Yi Guqin raised his hand and grabbed the void. Boundless ancient god power burst out from his body, and golden light surged like a tide. In the end, it transformed into a resplendent golden saint seal. It was as blazing and vigorous as the sun, bringing with it the power to suppress the world. It was the unique skill of the ancient god tribe. With Yi Guqin's 2-star ancient god cultivation, besides the ancient god spear, he could finally perform another ancient god clan martial arts. The holy seal was holy seal art. King Heavenly I had used it before. Although Yi Guqin was only a 2-star ancient god, he could not fully unleash the power of the holy seal art. He could not be compared to King Heavenly I, but its power was definitely not weaker than an emperor-level martial skill. Suppress. As Yi Guqin said that word, the golden holy seal that was like a sun suddenly pressed down on Shen Mubai. Wherever it passed, the sword energy and rainwater melted. Shen Mubai's move was easily broken by the golden holy seal art. In the end, it pressed down on Shen Mubai in front of everyone's shocked eyes. Fresh blood gushed out of Shen Mubai's mouth like it was free. His sternum was also shattered, emitting cracking sounds. His internal organs seemed to have shifted, and he fell to the ground in pain. A human-shaped hole appeared in the fighting arena. It was surrounded by cracks and Shen Mubai was lying in it like a dead dog. Dead silence. The entire Tianyuan fighting arena seemed to be frozen. Only Shen Mubai, who was lying in the hole, coughed up blood weakly and resounded in all directions. Shen Mubai lost? Many people still couldn't believe it, and were a little dazed. One of the 3 supreme talents of the Chuyin dynasty, a level 5 heaven and earth spiritual bridge talent, lost to an ordinary person. After a short period of dead silence, there was an uproar. This battle was very short. In just 3 moves, Shen Mubai was defeated. Then, they thought of Yi Guqin's arrogant words. Now who could still say that it was arrogant words? Some of the warriors present felt their cheeks burning. Some felt their faces hurt. However, most of them were shocked by Yi Guqin's strength. Han Lingxian was moved. She could not believe it. Shen Mubai, who even she could not defeat, was defeated by Yi Guqin in 3 moves. What was even more unbelievable was that Yi Guqin had not used his genuine qi or soul power from beginning to end. This was what everyone could not accept. Brother Dugu is so powerful? Han Xiaokui's eyes widened. Although she had confidence in Yi Guqin, it was still shocking to see it with her own eyes. Of course, among the 3 sisters, Han Ziqiang was the one who could not keep calm. Her body trembled and she was in a daze. The scene in front of her was like a dream to her. Yi Guqin, who she regarded as a useless person, defeated Shen Mubai, the supreme talent in her heart, in just 3 moves. Han Ziqiang's mind buzzed, and she lost her soul because of the contrast between heaven and earth. Even Hua Tingfei's face darkened. Shen Mubai was his friend. To put it bluntly, Shen Mubai was his follower and henchman. As the saying goes, one has to look at the master before beating a dog. Yi Guqin knew that Shen Mubai was related to him, but he still defeated Shen Mubai in such a way. This made Hua Feiting feel ashamed. Thinking of this, Hua Tingfei looked at Yi Guqin with a hint of coldness. Yi Guqin, who was in the field, was not surprised by the result. The martial arts of the ancient god clan are indeed extraordinary. Yi Guqin sighed in his heart. With his strength as a 2-star ancient god, and the martial arts of the ancient god clan. An ordinary heaven and earth spiritual bridge was no match for him. Perhaps only the supreme talents of the Sword Dynasty were qualified to fight with him. Shinmubai, it's over. Unfortunately, you can't take my head away. Yi Guqin said indifferently. Shinmubai, who was paralyzed in the pit, spat out a mouthful of blood. An endless sense of humiliation almost drowned his mind. However, he could not move at all, and had no strength to continue fighting. Yi Guqin saw this and shook his head. He turned and walked in the direction of the Han family. Although Shinmubai was annoying, Yi Guqin could not really kill him with Shunlai around. However, at this moment, a cold light flashed in Hua Fading's eyes. He waved his hand casually, and his genuine qi surged out. An extremely sharp sword light broke through the air from his hand, and rushed toward Yi Guqin. This sudden scene caused everyone to be extremely surprised. The sword light tore through the air, and almost instantly, it swept behind Yi Guqin. Brother Dugu, be careful. Young Master Dugu. Han Xiaokuei and Han Lingxuan's faces changed as they shouted. Yi Guqin's mind moved and a dreamlike sword light shot out from his body. It collided with Hua Tingfei's sword light, and the sound of metal hitting metal could be heard. However, when the sword light appeared, it was as if it had been struck by lightning. Han Ziqiang froze on the spot, as if she had been struck by lightning. Chapter 852. Hua Tingfei suddenly attacked. No one had expected this to happen. Even Yi Guqin was surprised. However, Yi Guqin reacted quickly and immediately took out his innate sword embryo to block the attack. Yi Guqin had recovered some of his strength, and he did not mind exposing his sword embryo. Moreover, there were many sword cultivators who nurtured sword embryos. Yi Guqin's true identity could not be exposed because of a sword embryo. Hua Tingfei actually attacked. Many warriors were shocked and disgust flashed across their eyes. A battle between warriors was about fairness. However, after Shenmubai was defeated, Hua Tingfei did not say anything and directly attacked. If Yi Guqin had not reacted quickly and took out his sword embryo to block the attack, Hua Tingfei would have succeeded. Dugu Wubai actually hid his strength. I think that sword embryo is also quite extraordinary. Many warriors whispered to each other. However, they did not realize that the sword embryo was Yi Guqin's gifted power. Unlike the astonishment of the crowd, only two figures stared at Yi Guqin in disbelief. Brother Dugu, could that sword light be? Han Xiaokuei's eyes were round and her mouth was agape. She had never been so shocked before. As for Han Ziqiang, her delicate body seemed to be frozen in ice. Her face was stiff and her brain seemed to have turned to mush. She and Han Xiaokuei were very familiar with the sword light that had escaped from Yi Guqin's body. It was the sword light that had killed all the blood demon bandits and saved the two sisters. At this moment, the sword light was actually taken out by Yi Guqin. The truth was self-evident. No, this is impossible, absolutely impossible. Han Ziqiang shook her head. Her face was extremely pale and bloodless because of the shock. Even when Yi Guqin had comprehended the imperial sword steel and defeated Shenmubai, Han Ziqiang was only very surprised and unwilling to believe it. But now, all of the shock that Han Ziqiang had experienced before was nothing compared to the shock that she felt when Yi Guqin brought out his sword embryo. In Han Ziqiang's mind, she had long since assumed that the mysterious man was a chosen one who didn't want to reveal his identity. He could destroy everything with a casual flick of his sword embryo. In her heart, she even had the fantasy of a young girl. But now, when her fantasy had become reality, Han Ziqiang was unable to accept the truth. Han Ziqiang recalled the time when she cupped her hands towards the void and thanked the mysterious person. Recalling this scene, Han Ziqiang felt that she was like a clown who made fun of people. What was even more laughable was that Han Ziqiang had even mocked Yi Guqin for being afraid of the blood demon thief vomiting blood. Now that he thought about it, it must have been the price that Yi Guqin had to pay for activating the sword embryo when he was injured. No wonder Big Brother Dugu vomited blood at that time. It was because he was activating the sword embryo. Han Xiaokuei also remembered. What? It was Dugu Wubai who saved you? Han Shan was also dumbfounded. When he thought about how he had ignored Yi Guqin, He looked a little embarrassed. I see. If that's the case, it's not surprising that he has such combat strength. Han Lingxian had also heard from Han Ziqiang that someone had saved them. She didn't expect that the person who had saved them was Yi Guqin. Second sister, now you understand everything. From the beginning, it was Big Brother Dugu who had been helping us. How could you treat him like that? Han Xiaokui said sternly. Han Ziqiang's throat was choked and she couldn't say a word. When she thought about what she had done, Han Ziqiang was so ashamed that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. On the other side, Yi Guqin turned around and the innate sword embryo floated around him. Yi Guqin had used his ancient god power to activate the innate sword embryo. He didn't expect it to be so effective. He looked at Hua Tingfei coldly. Hua Tingfei's sword light was aimed at Shen Tian's heart. As expected, Yi Guqin didn't react in time and didn't block the attack with his innate sword embryo. This attack was enough to kill him. Hua Tingfei frowned slightly. He didn't expect Yi Guqin to be able to block this attack. What is the meaning of this? Yi Guqin's tone was as cold as ice. Nothing. Brother Shen is my friend. You didn't give me any face and hurt him like this. Don't you think I should stand up for him? Hua Tingfei's tone was cold and arrogant. His strength wasn't much among the Sword Dynasty's prodigies, but he had always been fearless because he was from the Hua family. He was already arrogant when facing the prodigies of the Sword Dynasty, let alone Yi Guqin. Do I need to give you face? Yi Guqin's tone was cold. He would never give face to his enemies. How would you know the status of the Hua family in the Sword Dynasty? How about this? Kneel in front of Brother Shen and apologize. See if he is willing to forgive you. Hua Tingfei said indifferently. Shen Mubai took a deep breath and stood up with difficulty. He no longer had the demeanor of a gentleman. Shen Mubai's eyes were filled with vengeance. He said coldly, "If you want my forgiveness, kneel down and beg for mercy first." Shen Mubai's face was filled with joy. With Hua Tingfei behind him, Shen Mubai was confident. Not to mention, in his eyes, Yi Guqin had no background and was nothing to be afraid of. Yi Guqin didn't say a word and slowly walked toward Shen Mubai. Is Dugu Wubai really going to kneel down? Probably. After all, with Hua Tingfei here, the Hua family can't afford to offend him. Sigh, what a pity for a young hero. Some of the martial artists around sighed. Even the Cloud Emperor frowned slightly. However, Hua Tingfei had the Hua family's background, and the Cloud Dynasty couldn't afford to offend him. This is too much. Han Xiaokui's eyes were spitting fire. Han Lingshuan's face was also cold, but more than that, she was helpless. Sometimes the situation was stronger than the person, and one had to admit defeat. Just when everyone thought that Yi Guqin was going to admit defeat, Yi Guqin's eyes flashed coldly. He kicked at Shen Mubai with his powerful physical strength. Puchi! Shen Mubai's body flew out like a kite with a broken string. He spat out more blood and pieces of his internal organs. Shen Lai was there, so Yi Guqin's kick didn't take Shen Mubai's life. However, it was obvious that Shen Mubai was almost crippled. He wouldn't be able to get out of bed without at least half a year of recuperation. You deserve to die. Shen Lai's eyes were about to pop out. All the surrounding martial artists were even more stunned. Yi Guqin actually dared to ignore Hua Tingfei? Do you want to die so badly? Hua Tingfei's aura rose. His eyes were cold, and his aura surged. You're the one who wants to die. Yi Guqin stomped on the ground, and it was like a thunderclap. His body shot out like a bolt of lightning. The golden ancient god power surged in his fist, and it burst out with endless golden light. It was as if he was holding the sun, and he punched at Hua Tingfei. You're courting death. Hua Tingfei held his sword and pointed it at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin opened his 5 fingers and grabbed the blade of Hua Tingfei's sword with one hand. Break! Yi Guqin shouted coldly, and the ancient god power surged out. With a crisp crack, Hua Tingfei's sword was crushed into pieces. Yi Guqin clenched his fist again, and punched at Hua Tingfei's chest. Boom! A dull, drum-like sound erupted, accompanied by a miserable scream. Hua Tingfei spat out blood and flew out. Chapter 853. The audience fell into dead silence. Everyone's face was a little stiff from shock, and the corners of their mouths were twitching. Just now, Yi Guqin had defeated Shen Mubai in 3 moves, which had already surprised them. But at this moment, the scene of Yi Guqin crushing the sword with one hand and blasting Hua Tingfei away once again made everyone gasp. Hua Tingfei may not be considered a top heaven pride in the Sword Dynasty, or even in the Hua family, but in the Cloud Dynasty, he was already one of the top heaven prides, and even surpassed Shen Mubai and the other 2. And now, Hua Tingfei, who was high and mighty in the eyes of everyone, was like a dog paralyzed on the ground, constantly crying out in pain. Ah! Damn it, you lowly mortal! Hua Tingfei stood up with difficulty, clutching his chest, feeling that several of his sternum were broken. He relied on his status in the Hua family to abuse his power everywhere, but his strength was indeed not strong. Therefore, it was too easy for Yi Guqin to deal with Hua Tingfei. So you can't take a move from a mortal? Yi Guqin tilted his head slightly, his tone icy cold. Hua Tingfei was so angry that he couldn't help but spit out a small mouthful of blood. Good. Good, you dare to treat me like this. I will make you pay the price. My cousin is an existence you absolutely can't afford to offend. Feeling the coldness condensing in Yi Guqin's eyes, Hua Tingfei didn't dare to casually attack again, for fear that Yi Guqin would directly kill him. But he was unwilling to admit defeat, so he said in a strong voice. Yi Guqin's face was indifferent, without the slightest change. Hua Tingfei said sternly, my cousin Hua Wuxia is an existence of the divine dwelling stage, 3rd on the sword ranking, and a disciple of the holy emblem of Tensei College. Can you afford to offend him? Hua Tingfei raised his chin, his eyes full of contempt. He thought that after he said this, Yi Guqin would turn pale with fright, and then kneel down and beg for mercy. Because in the past, when Hua Tingfei said this, all of his opponents had done the same. Dan Hua Tingfei was stunned. Because Yi Guqin was expressionless. His expression did not change in the slightest because of these words. Firstly, Yi Guqin did not know about Hua Wuxia, nor did he know about the special meaning of Tensei College, the holy emblem disciple, and the sword ranking. Secondly, even if Yi Guqin knew about it, he would not have any misgivings. No matter how strong Hua Wuxia was, he was no match for Gu Xiaoyang and Di Haotian. For Yi Guqin, who had been through a lot, this kind of opponent could make him guard against, but he could not make him fear. Although Yi Guqin's expression did not change, Han Lingxian and the others' expressions changed drastically. That holy light and darkness physique, Hua Wuxia, is actually his cousin. Han Lingxuan's face paled. That kind of person was already a heavenly figure to her. It was simply unattainable. No matter how hard Han Lingxian tried, she did not think that she could catch up to such a heaven's pride. Looking at the Sword Dynasty, which was full of talents and countless heaven's pride of the sword, Hua Wuxia was also an absolutely dazzling existence. In Han Lingxuan's eyes, Yi Guqin's performance was already amazing. However, when compared to Hua Wuxia, he immediately paled in comparison. Faced with such a hidden danger, Han Lingxian was incomparably worried. Not only Han Lingxian, but some of the surrounding warriors who had heard of Hua Wuxia's name also changed their expressions greatly. They looked at Hua Tingfei with astonishment. No wonder Hua Tingfei's strength was not outstanding, but he was so arrogant. It turned out that he had such a powerful cousin behind him. Oh, as expected of a frog at the bottom of a well. But after all, you're immortal. It's normal that you haven't heard of my cousin's name. You only need to know that no matter how strong you are, my cousin can instantly kill you. Hua Tingfei's tone was arrogant and unruly, as if he had found his backbone. Just one Hua Wuxia is enough to make you so arrogant. Yi Guqin's tone was cold. Suddenly, he activated the innate sword embryo and turned into a shocking rainbow light, violently sweeping towards Hua Tingfei. Young Master Dugu, you can't. Han Lingxian cried out involuntarily. Defeating Hua Wuxia was nothing. But if he killed him, he would make a mortal enemy of Hua Wuxia. Puchi. Blood spurted out, and a severed arm flew out. The cut was incomparably smooth. Ah! A scream followed. Hua Tingfei clutched the wound on his right shoulder. His face was pale as he looked at Yi Guqin in disbelief. If you don't get lost, my next sword will take your life. Yi Guqin's tone was cold. Hua Tingfei's throat choked, and his body trembled like a sieve. Even though he had an arrogant personality, he cherished his life even more. Without another word, he fled with his tail between his legs. Looking at Hua Tingfei's figure flashing away, Yi Guqin frowned slightly. Of course, he was not soft-hearted or merciful. After all, Yi Guqin's hands were stained with blood. He would not be soft-hearted and let the tiger return to the mountain. However, if he killed Hua Tingfei directly, he would not even be able to leave the arena. Shen Lai would also find an excuse to capture him, and then directly hand him over to the Hua family. Instead of doing that, Yi Guqin might as well drive Hua Tingfei away, and then leave for the Sword Dynasty. Once he entered the Sword Dynasty, Yi Guqin would find a way to contact Kenpo. At that time, the problem of the Hua family would naturally be solved. Let's go back. Yi Guqin walked in front of Han Lingxian and the others and said lightly, "Oh." Han Lingxian was slightly stunned, and then nodded blankly. Han Lingxian really could not see through the young man in front of her. He was still so calm after provoking the Hua family. Han Xiaokui jumped 3 feet high, and was extremely proud of Yi Guqin's performance. Han Ziqiang, on the other hand, was full of shame. She lowered her head and did not dare to face Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin did not care. As the incident at the Tianyuan arena came to an end, the name Dugu Wubai swept across the area like a storm. He had crushed Shin Mubai in 3 moves, and even cut off Hua Tingfei's arm with 1 sword. Coupled with the deeds at the Imperial Sword Tablet, Yi Guqin's reputation in the Chuyin dynasty had surpassed the 3 heavenly prides. But there were also people who were not optimistic about Yi Guqin. Not to mention that Yi Guqin did not have qi cultivation. Hua Tingfei would definitely not let Yi Guqin go so easily. In the hall of the Han family, Han Shan, the 3 sisters, and Yi Guqin were there. Han Shan observed Yi Guqin, as if he wanted to see through him. Even he had misjudged Yi Guqin in the beginning. He did not realize that Yi Guqin was an unpolished gem. But no matter how Han Shan looked, Yi Guqin did not have qi cultivation. At most, he had a strong physical body. But that alone meant that he would not be able to go far. Coupled with the fact that Yi Guqin had provoked Hua Tingfei, Han Shan's expression changed slightly. In the end he sighed and said, "My friend Dugu, I did misjudge you. But the Han family is too small to accommodate a big Buddha like you, so..." Han Shan paused and stopped talking. "Father, how can you do this?" Brother Dugu helped the Han family obtain the imperial sword skill. Han Xiaokui glared. Wasn't he burning the bridge after crossing the river? Chapter 854. When Yi Guqin heard this, his face was indifferent. In truth, even if Han Shan hadn't mentioned it, Yi Guqin would have left anyway. After all, the Chuyin dynasty was too small for Yi Guqin. He had his own plans, and he had to go to the Sword Dynasty. So Yi Guqin only casually said, "Han family head, you're worrying too much. I've never thought of staying in the Han family forever. I'll say my goodbyes now." Big brother Dugu. Han Xiaokui was startled, her expression filled with reluctance. Where does young master Dugu want to go? Han Lingxian was also startled. Yi Guqin replied, "The Sword Dynasty." "What? You want to go to the Sword Dynasty?" Han Ziqiang lowered her head, remaining silent. Han Ziqiang lifted her head and looked at Yi Guqin when she heard him mention the Sword Empire. Her eyes were filled with surprise. Did he not know that the Hua family he had provoked was the Sword Dynasty's peak Sword Dao family? As for Hua Tingfei's older cousin, Hua Wuxia, he was an influential figure in the Sword Dynasty. For Yi Guqin to go to the Sword Dynasty, wasn't that just courting death? Little friend, please reconsider. The Hua family's foundation in the Sword Dynasty isn't so simple. Although the Sword Dynasty is large, if the Hua family wants to target you, it's simple, advised Han Shan. Oh, then is the Hua family and Hua Wuxia really that terrifying? Yi Guqin raised an eyebrow. Han Lingxian was the one who understood the Sword Dynasty the most. Let's not talk about how much power the Hua family has in the Sword Dao Alliance. Just Hua Wuxia is a character that we definitely have to look up to. He broke through to the Divine Dwelling stage at the age of 20, and he's a grade 7 prodigy. He has the Sacred Light and Darkness body, and he has 2 types of swords. He's ranked 3rd on the sword ranking, and is a disciple of the Holy Emblem of Tensei College. He's very strong. When Han Lingxian said this, her eyes were filled with a trace of reverence. She felt that she and Wuxia were from two different worlds. However, Han Lingxian did not know that the young man in front of her was an existence that could compete with Gu Xiaoyang and Di Haotian. Although Wuxia was strong, he had not reached the level of the 10 young masters. Seeing Han Lingxuan's fascinated expression, Yi Guchen's expression was indifferent. Although he did not know the concept of the so-called sword ranking and holy emblem disciple, it presumably represented Wuxia's extraordinary status and talent. But unfortunately, it was not enough to make Yi Guchen feel any fear. When he found the sacred medicine to restore his cultivation, and broke through to the spirit bridge stage in one fell swoop, he could even compete with the divine dwelling stage. I've made up my mind. I'll take my leave. Yi Guchen cupped his hands. If that's the case, then Lingxian will go with you. I'm also going to the Sword Dynasty. Han Lingxian bit her lips. Lingxian you. Han Shan's expression changed slightly. Yi Guchen had provoked the Hua family, and going to the Sword Dynasty was courting death. If Han Lingxian went with Yi Guchen, she would inevitably be implicated. No need. Yi Guchen waved his hand. He did not want to implicate others. Young Master Dugu, Lingxian knows how to repay kindness. Moreover, I've traveled to the Sword Dynasty several times and met some people. Perhaps I can help you in the Sword Dynasty. Han Lingxian said. Han Shan was speechless. He knew his daughter's character best. Although she looked gentle and graceful, she was a woman of her word. If that's the case, then I'll trouble you. Yi Guchen said casually. He had the Sword Sun token given to him by Kenpo, and presumably it would be useful in the Sword Dynasty. But since Han Lingxian was so sincere, Yi Guchen could not refuse. That's good. Let's set off tomorrow. The 5 Great Academies selection is not far away. Han Lingxian pursed her lips into a smile. Then Yi Guchen returned to his room. Han Xiaokuei's face was full of reluctance, and she was sobbing. Her and Han Ziqiang's cultivation was not high enough, and they did not have the strength to join the 5 Great Academies, so they would not go with Han Lingxian. Han Ziqiang did not dare to face Yi Guchen. Her head was lowered, and she was incomparably ashamed. Yi Guchen did not mind. From the beginning to the end, he did not put Han Ziqiang in his eyes. She was just a passerby. After a night, Yi Guchen adjusted his breathing, and then he boarded a flying boat with Han Lingxian. Big brother Dugu, Xiaokuei will also go to the Sword Dynasty in the future. Xiaokuei believes that even in the Sword Dynasty, Big brother Dugu will become the most powerful sword cultivator. Han Xiaokuei cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted loudly. Cultivate well. Yi Guchen stood at the bow of the boat and smiled faintly. Han Lingxian shook her head slightly and laughed. Han Xiaokuei completely idolized Yi Guchen. However, Han Lingxian knew how difficult it was to make a name for oneself in the Sword Dynasty. Although Yi Guchen had made a name for himself in the Chuyin Dynasty and shocked everyone. However, in the Sword Dynasty, even a top genius like Han Lingxian could only be considered mediocre. Yi Guchen's physical strength was not weak, but it was after all an unorthodox path. True qi and soul power were the true path of cultivation. Therefore, when Han Xiaokuei said that Yi Guchen shocked everyone in the Sword Dynasty, Han Lingxian only smiled. The difficulty was too great. After that, Yi Guchen and Han Lingxian boarded the flying boat and left. Looking at the flying boat in the distance, Han Xiaokuei clenched her fists and muttered, Big brother Dugu, I'll wait for you to make a name for yourself in the Sword Dynasty. Han Ziqiang shook her head and sighed. Xiaokuei, you're underestimating the Sword Dynasty. As the leader of the 100 great dynasties and a country of sword cultivators, how difficult is it to make a name for oneself in that kind of place? I believe in Big brother Dugu. Han Xiaokuei swore solemnly. Sigh. Han Ziqiang did not say anything else. Yi Guchen's performance had indeed shocked her. However, in a place like the Sword Dynasty, there was no lack of monstrous sword cultivators. If it was Yi Guchen, who defeated Gu Xiaoyang and Di Haotian, maybe he could do it. Han Ziqiang suddenly thought. The boundless sky was filled with thin layers of clouds. Yi Guqin and Han Lingxian boarded the flying boat and left the Izumo dynasty. Han Lingxian intended to treat this as a training exercise, so she did not bring any servants from the Han family. Although the Izumo dynasty is close to the Sword dynasty, it'll still take more than 10 days to get there, Han Lingxian said. I have a question, Yi Guqin suddenly said. What is it? Han Lingxian asked. How do you become the sword son of the Sword dynasty? Yi Guqin asked casually. This question. What are you talking about? Han Lingxian was about to answer when her expression froze. Become the sword son of the Sword dynasty? She looked at Yi Guqin with a strange and puzzled expression. Did he not know what the sword son meant? Young Master Dugu, do you know what a sword son is? Of course I do. There are a total of 13 sword sons in the Sword dynasty, and their status is equivalent to that of a prince. Yi Guqin nodded. Kempo had told him all this. Since you know young Master Dugu, are you joking? Han Lingxian laughed. What do you mean? Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows slightly. After becoming a sword son, one could directly participate in the Battle of Prodigies. Therefore, Yi Guqin had already made up his mind to become a sword son. However, judging from Han Lingxuan's tone, it was not that easy to become a sword son. Chapter 855. The sword son of the Sword dynasty is a lofty position. Even Wuxia and the others on the sword ranking are inferior to the sword son. That kind of existence is not something you can become just because you want to. Han Lingxian smiled faintly and shook her head. She thought that Yi Guqin's question was a little ridiculous. Is that so? Yi Guqin was a little puzzled. Because Kempo said that with his talent and strength, it would not be too difficult to become the Sword dynasty's sword son. It seems that the reality is not so. To become the Sword dynasty's sword son, you have to pass 5 tests and kill 6 generals. Not to mention other things, if you can't enter the 5 great academies, then you don't even have the qualifications to compete for the title of sword son. Han Lingxian explained. I'd like to hear more. Yi Guqin frowned and said. He did not know much about the Sword dynasty. The Sword dynasty does not have sex, only the Sword Dao alliance. The aristocratic families also belong to the Sword Dao alliance. The 5 great academies were established by the Sword Dao alliance to nurture the Sword dynasty, and all the geniuses who came because of the Sword Dao alliance's reputation, providing a steady stream of new blood for the Sword Dao alliance. And to become the sword son, the first thing you need to do is find a way to enter the 5 great academies. I came to the Sword dynasty because of this goal. Han Lingxian said. I see. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. In fact, he was not very willing to join the 5 great academies, because there were not many people who were qualified to teach him the way of the sword. But to become the sword son, one must be a genius of the 5 great academies. In the 5 great academies, in addition to the guidance of famous teachers, more than half of the Sword dynasty's resources are gathered there. I heard from Xiao Kuei that you need sacred medicine to recover from your injuries, so you should have a good chance in the academies. Han Lingxian glanced at Yi Guqin and said. Yi Guqin nodded. Cultivation resources were indeed what he needed the most right now. Yi Guqin, you can join the academy. In addition to cultivation resources, some of the Sword dynasty's secret realms are only open to students of the academy. Yi Guqin heard Su Qingyu's voice in his mind. Is that so? Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. As a nation of sword cultivators, the Sword dynasty obviously had many precious treasures for sword cultivators. The Sword dynasty naturally wouldn't share these treasures with everyone for free. Perhaps only the disciples of the 5 great academies under the Sword Dao alliance were qualified to enjoy it. Yi Guqin finally understood why the Sword dynasty attracted so many Sword Dao prodigies. Right, what's the point of the so-called sword ranking? Yi Guqin asked again. The Sword dynasty gathered countless Sword Dao prodigies in the South Horizon region. Naturally, there would be a ranking, and the sword ranking is the ranking of the younger generation of Sword Dao prodigies in the Sword dynasty. There are a total of 100 names on the sword ranking, which is also known as the prospective sword son ranking, because almost everyone who is on the sword ranking has the possibility of competing for the position of sword son. The top 20 prodigies on the sword ranking are no weaker than the sword sun. Han Lingxian said with a yearning look in her eyes. If one wanted to become famous in the sword dynasty, the fastest way was to be on the sword ranking. Being able to be on the sword ranking was also a supreme honor. When Yi Guqin heard this, he finally understood. Why was everyone so shocked when Hua Wuxiu said that his cousin was Hua Tingfei? In the vast sword dynasty, there were only 100 prodigies who could be on the sword ranking. And Hua Wuxiu, who was ranked third, was naturally an existence that everyone looked up to. Do you have the sword ranking list? Yi Guqin asked. This is not a secret. The last few dozen names on the sword ranking list are updated almost every day, but the top 30 or 40 names do not change much. Han Lingxian took out a jade slip and handed it to Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin took it and scanned it with his divine sense. 98th on the sword ranking, Xue Chongfeng, a disciple of the Xue family, a level 8 heaven and earth spirit bridge prodigy. 84th on the sword ranking, Zhong Yan, a wandering prodigy who comprehended the metal sword Dao, a level 8 heaven and earth spirit bridge prodigy. The higher Yi Guqin scanned, the stronger the prodigies were. This is. When Yi Guqin's gaze landed on the 12th place on the sword ranking, his eyes suddenly froze. 12th place on the sword ranking, Mu Xingzu, a prodigy of the Tianxian College. She comprehended the peerless soul sword Dao, had extraordinary talents, and was at the peak of the level 9 heaven and earth spirit bridge. She could easily retreat from a divine palace expert. Mu Xingzu. Yi Guqin murmured. He didn't expect to see this girl here. Yi Guqin couldn't help but think of the stubborn girl who gritted her teeth and persevered under Qin Linner's sword when he first entered the sword sect pagoda forest. Now, she also relied on her own efforts to make a name for herself in the sword dynasty. She was no longer the girl who needed Yi Guqin's protection. Mu Xingzu is also a prodigy who recently rose to prominence. She was directly admitted to the Tianxian College, one of the 5 major colleges, but I heard that she never gets close to anyone of the opposite sex. Han Lingxian saw the strange look on Yi Guqin's face and looked deeply at him. Isn't Gongzi Dugu not interested in women? Why do you have such a big reaction to Mu Xingzu? Facing the 3 sisters, Yi Guqin was able to remain indifferent. Therefore, in Han Lingshuan's eyes, Yi Guqin should be the kind of swordsman who prioritized the way of the sword. Maybe Mu Xingzu is too outstanding. No matter how hard Han Lingxian thought about it, she would never have thought of it. The young man in front of her was the master of Mu Xingzu, who was ranked 12th on the sword ranking. If Han Lingxian knew the truth, she would definitely be so shocked that she couldn't close her mouth. Later, Yi Guqin also saw Hua Wuxiu, who was ranked 3rd on the sword ranking. Divine Palace cultivation, 7th grade prodigy, dual sword Dao, and all kinds of halos on his body. Gongzi Dugu, I hope you can keep a low profile in the sword dynasty. Hua Wuxiu might not care about people like us, but if Hua Tingfei pursues to the end, it will be very troublesome. Han Lingxian warned. Part of the reason why Yi Guqin and Hua Tingfei had a grudge against each other was because of her. Therefore, Han Lingxian didn't want to see Yi Guqin be killed by Hua Wuxiu and the others. But Han Lingshuan's words seemed to mean that they were very inferior in the eyes of Hua Wuxiu. It was like a lion that didn't care about ants at its feet. Yi Guqin smiled and didn't say anything. Han Lingxian only knew that his physical strength was amazing, and that he could fight against a 5th-level Heaven-Earth Bridge prodigy. But she didn't know that when he recovered his cultivation, his strength would skyrocket again. Even Hua Wuxiu couldn't put on airs in front of him. When we arrive at the Sword Dynasty, I will be able to contact my acquaintances. Coincidentally, the selection of the 5 academies is about to begin. This time, I must enter the 5 academies, Han Lingxian vowed. She enjoyed a lot of fame in the Chuyan dynasty. However, in the Sword Dynasty, even if she wasn't at the bottom of the Chuyan dynasty, she definitely wasn't outstanding. Han Lingxian glanced at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's comprehension of swordsmanship had surprised her, but unfortunately, he could not cultivate it. Han Lingxian sighed and said, Gongzi Dugu, don't mind it. It's already amazing that you can cultivate your physical body to this level. As for whether you can enter the 5 academies, like Lingxian, it depends on luck. Han Lingxian smiled bitterly. Depends on luck, huh? Yi Guchen smiled faintly. Chapter 856. The Sword Dynasty was the leader of the 100 great dynasties in the South Horizon region. In the Sword Dynasty, everyone practiced the sword. Although there were other warriors, there was no doubt that only sword cultivators could obtain the greatest cultivation and growth in the Sword Dynasty. On the other hand, only geniuses of the Sword Dao could be listed on the sword ranking, which was filled with endless halos. The Sword Alliance was a gathering of many sword cultivators in the South Horizon region. It was extremely prosperous. For various reasons, the Sword Dynasty became a sword cultivator's kingdom in the South Horizon region. It could be said that other than the overlord forces, the Sword Dynasty was a paradise for all sword cultivators in the South Horizon region. After more than 10 days, Yi Guchen and Han Lingxian finally entered the Sword Dynasty's territory. The Sword Dynasty was extremely vast, with a total of 360 ridges. The size of each territory was comparable to a prefecture in the Saint Origin Dynasty. The Saint Origin Dynasty only had 10 prefectures, but the Sword Dynasty had 360. In other words, the Sword Dynasty's area was comparable to 36 Saint Origin dynasties added together. One could imagine how vast the land was. Han Lingxian led Yi Guchen to the Heavenly Wind Ridge of the 360 ridges. I'm good friends with the Princess of the Heavenly Wind Ridge, Qin Paisai. With her help, our chances of entering the 5 great academies will be higher. Han Lingxian said. Yi Guchen nodded and looked into the distance. A towering city sat on the ground. It was prosperous and bustling, far surpassing the Saint Origin Dynasty's imperial capital. The Heavenly Wind City is in front. Han Lingxian said. The Heavenly Wind City was the largest city in the Heavenly Wind Ridge. It was also the residence of the Lord of the Heavenly Wind Ridge. Each of the 360 ridges in the Sword Dynasty was governed by a lord. It was equivalent to the lord of the 10 prefectures in the Saint Origin Dynasty. The Qin Paisai that Han Lingxian mentioned was the daughter of the Lord of the Heavenly Wind Ridge. After a while, the airship landed outside the Heavenly Wind City. Flying was not allowed in the capital. Yi Guchen and Han Lingxian walked towards Heavenly Wind City. The city walls were dark green in color, looking as if they had gone through the vicissitudes of life. The wide city gate was at least 10 feet high, and there was an endless stream of people coming and going. After paying the entrance fee, Yi Guchen and Yi Zichen entered the city. Yi Guchen glanced around and was surprised to find that almost everyone on the road carried a sword or had sword chi on them. Although there were other ancient martial art practitioners, most of them were swordsmen. So this is the Sword Dynasty? Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. He was a sword demon, born for the sword. In a place like the Sword Dynasty, he should be like a fish in water. Yi Guchen was also looking forward to the wonderful experiences he would have in the Sword Dynasty. Hey, have you guys heard? The Lord will be holding the Heavenly Wind Banquet in 5 days. Yeah, the Heavenly Wind Banquet is inviting talents from all over. It seems like he's preparing for the selection of the 5 great academies. Indeed, during the last recruitment, our Heavenly Wind Ridge was targeted by the Yellow Dragon Ridge, Purple Smoke Ridge, and other places, causing no one to enter the academy. If the same thing happens again, I'm afraid the Heavenly Wind Lord will be replaced. Shoo, don't say such things. On the streets, in some restaurants and tea houses, some ancient martial art practitioners were whispering to each other. The Heavenly Wind Banquet is about to start. Let's find a place to stay first, then I'll go find Pei Si. Han Lingxian said. Yi Guchen didn't mind. Soon after, the two of them found an inn and asked for 2 rooms. Young Master Degu, I'll go find Pei Si. Be careful. Han Lingxian warned. Yi Guchen nodded. He knew that Han Lingxian was warning him to be careful of the Hua family. Although it was impossible for Hua Tingfei to suddenly come to Heavenly Wind Ridge, the Hua family had a lot of power in the Sword Dynasty. After Han Lingxian left, Yi Guchen casually strolled around the streets. The feeling of being surrounded by sword cultivators was quite good. Most of the items sold in the armament pavilion on the streets were swords. 3-year-old children were also waving bamboo swords around. What's that? Yi Guchen saw that at the end of the street, there was an incomparably majestic building that occupied a large area. On top of the building, there was a plaque with the words Sword Ranking Temple written on it. Sword Ranking Temple, is it related to the sword ranking? Yi Guqin thought to himself. He found a passerby and asked, "Brother, this must be your first time in the Sword Dynasty. You don't even know about the Sword Ranking Temple?" The martial art practitioner chuckled. "I'd like to hear more about it," Yi Guqin said. The Sword Ranking Temple is an institution set up by the Sword Dao Alliance. There are some sword moves left behind by the prodigies of the sword ranking that can be cultivated for free. Of course, if one is powerful enough, they can even break the sword moves. However, such people are too rare. The martial art practitioner shook his head and said, "I see. Thank you." Yi Guqin nodded slightly, and then directly entered the Sword Ranking Temple. The Sword Ranking Temple was extremely large, and there was an endless stream of sword cultivators coming and going. TSK, as expected of an expert on the sword ranking. Even if he's ranked at the bottom, his sword moves are too powerful. Yeah, I'm not considered weak, but I was defeated by the 86th ranked Zhao Yifeng's shadow in one strike. There's no way I can break it. As soon as Yi Guqin entered the Sword Ranking Temple, he heard the whispers of the sword cultivators around him. Many sword cultivators would come to the Sword Ranking Temple to fight with the shadows left behind by the prodigies of the sword ranking to hone their swordsmanship. There were even more ambitious people who wanted to break the swordsmanship of the prodigies of the sword ranking and become famous. Of course, there were too few of them. "Sir, are you also here to challenge the shadows of the prodigies of the sword ranking?" A beautiful maid stepped forward. She glanced at Yi Guqin and found that he had no aura at all. He looked just like a mortal. A trace of contempt flashed in her eyes, but she did not show it. Her words were still appropriate. "May I know how to challenge these shadows?" Yi Guqin asked. "So he's a mortal from another dynasty." The maid thought to herself. She said with a smile, "If you want to challenge the shadows, you can directly enter the arena after concealing your identity. If you're lucky enough to break the sword move, it'll be less troublesome to conceal your identity. After all, those prodigies of the sword ranking are all arrogant people." "Is that so?" Yi Guqin's eyes flickered. But on second thought, it was human nature. If the sword move he left behind was broken by someone else, how could he not fight with the person who broke it? It was also because of this that the Sword Ranking Temple set up a rule that all those who wanted to challenge the shadows had to conceal their identity. Of course, if he was willing to expose himself, it did not matter. He just had to bear the consequences. Seeing Yi Guqin's indifferent expression, the maid felt even more disdain in her heart. Another ignorant person who thinks he can break the moves of the prodigies of the sword ranking. The maid had seen many people like this. They thought they were so powerful that they could sweep through all directions with their swords. But the prodigies of the sword Dao who could be on the sword ranking were not ordinary people. In the end, most of the challengers ended up being defeated miserably. When the real challenge comes, you'll know how big the gap is between you and the prodigies of the sword ranking. The maid shook her head slightly and thought to herself. Chapter 857. Yi Guqin could see the disdain in the maid's eyes, but he did not care. Just as he was about to face the sword roll prodigy's shadow, suddenly, there was a commotion at the entrance of the temple. "Isn't that the Su siblings? They're here? Hey, who's the person behind them? Why are the Su siblings treating him so respectfully?" The Su family was a well-known family in the Tianfeng Ridge. Of course, they could not be compared to the families in the Sword Dao Alliance, let alone the Hua family. But in the Tianfeng Ridge, the Su family still had a certain status. Yi Guqin looked over and saw three figures walking in from the entrance. The two in front of him were a man and a woman who looked very similar. The man was slender and handsome, while the woman had a curvy figure and was as charming as a flower. It's Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing, but who's the person behind them? In the temple, many people looked at the young man and woman. Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing were the most outstanding prodigies of the Su family. Although they were nothing in the Sword Dynasty, they were still quite famous in the Tianfeng Ridge. They were both at level 6 of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. They were even stronger than Han Lingxian, and the other top 3 prodigies of the Yun dynasty. From this, one could see how fierce the competition was in the Sword dynasty. A level 6 prodigy could only have some fame in a territory. Behind Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing, there was a hooded figure in a dark blue robe. Although his aura was not obvious, it gave people a feeling of profoundness. Most importantly, both Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing were extremely respectful toward that figure. Because of that, even more people became curious about that person. Young Master Yu, with your status, there's no need for you to come here to cultivate, Su Wenbin said in a low voice. It's just a warm-up. After all, the Tianfeng feast is in 5 days. The mysterious person called Young Master Yu said in a calm and arrogant tone. Even in front of the Su siblings, who were quite famous in the Tianfeng Ridge, he still had a condescending attitude. However, Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing were not dissatisfied at all. Su Jingjing's beautiful eyes were burning with passion as she said with a hint of admiration. As expected of Young Master Yu, I believe that Young Master Yu will be able to create a new record in the Sword List Shrine today. That's not necessarily true. Although it's just an illusion, it's still difficult to defeat those experts ranked at the top of the sword ranking. Young Master Jade said lightly. Greetings, Young Master Su, Young Lady Su, and this gentleman. The maid who served Yi Guqin immediately ran over to Su Wenbin and the others. Compared to Yi Guqin, it was clear that the Su siblings were more important people that she needed to entertain. Yes, make some arrangements for this young master. He wants to start a challenge as well, Su Wenbin said. Yes. The maid nodded and respectfully led Young Master Jade into the rear pavilion. Yi Guqin was left out in the cold. He didn't mind and entered the back pavilion. Soon Yi Guqin put on a mask and a black cloak. What's his name? Before entering the arena to challenge, he had to leave his name. Of course, because they were hiding their identity, no one would report their real name. Sword Demon, Yi Guqin said lightly. What a domineering name. The person who registered the name chuckled. Then Yi Guqin stepped onto the arena. On the surface of the arena, bursts of brilliance suddenly rose, and the power of the array surged. Then, it condensed into an illusion in front of Yi Guqin. It was a young man. This man's illusion was Xue Changfeng, who was ranked 98th on the sword list. My sword move is called the Changfeng sword technique. Xue Changfeng's illusion finished speaking and directly charged with his sword. The sword momentum was like a storm. Yi Guqin held an ordinary long sword in his hand and collided with Xue Changfeng's illusion. The sword-ranking Divine Palace tested one's sword skills more than one's cultivation level. Therefore, even if Yi Guqin had no vital energy now, he would not be overwhelmed. Those who can enter the sword list are indeed capable. Yi Guqin's eyes were slightly surprised when he felt the sword skill that was like a gale passing through. Of course, that was all. In Yi Guqin's eyes, this sword skill was still full of flaws. Boom. In just a dozen rounds, Yi Guqin broke Xue Changfeng's sword skill with a single strike. Someone succeeded in breaking the sword skill of a prodigy on the sword list. The commotion on Yi Guqin's side also attracted the attention of people from all directions. After all, most of the sword cultivators who came here could not break the sword skill. It's Xue Changfeng, who is ranked 98th. Although he's at the bottom, his Changfeng sword technique is not that easy to break. Some sword cultivators looked at Yi Guqin in surprise. And he broke it so quickly. Could it be Young Master Yu? Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing looked at Yi Guqin in surprise. Due to the mask and wide cloak, outsiders could not tell who it was. It should be Young Master Yu. Other than him, who else can break the sword skill of a prodigy on the sword list so easily? Su Jingjing was convinced. Little did they know that Young Master Yu was currently in another arena, competing with a prodigy on the sword list. He was not weak and quickly broke the sword skill of a prodigy on the sword list. However, he was clearly slower than Yi Guqin. On the other side, Yi Guqin continued to challenge. Lei Chun, ranked 88th on the sword list, broke it within 20 moves. Mo Ling, ranked 81st on the sword list, broke it within 20 moves. Gong Yangming, ranked 75th on the sword list, broke it within 20 moves. Every time Yi Guqin broke the sword skill of a prodigy on the sword list, it would cause an uproar. If it was just once or twice, it might be admirable, but it would not be shocking. On the other hand, Yi Guqin did not stop at all. Those prodigies ranked lower on the sword list could not last more than 10 moves against Yi Guqin. Who is this sword demon challenger? He's too terrifying. That's right. Such a complicated and difficult sword technique was actually deciphered so easily. Could it be some old monster challenging him? Everyone in the sword list shrine was shocked as they watched Yi Guqin continue to challenge. At this moment, another figure appeared in front of Yi Guqin. This figure was thin and wore a bamboo hat. He did not hold a sword in his hand, but a flute. Heavens, it's Yen Choke, ranked 40th on the sword list. Can Sword Demon break it? Following the appearance of this figure, all the sword cultivators present stared at Yi Guqin without blinking. A prodigy who could enter the top 50 on the sword list was definitely a prodigy of the sword Dao. As for Yen Choke, he was an extremely famous itinerant elite in the sword dynasty. With his Misty Rain illusory sword, he had defeated many prodigies on the sword list. I've finally encountered an interesting person. Yi Guqin smiled faintly under his mask. Chapter 858. The 100 Sword Dao elites ranked on the sword roll. The elites ranked at the bottom would often change. However, once they were ranked above the top 50, they would not change easily. This was because the elites that could rank in the top 50 of the sword roll had absolute strength. They had trump cards that they were good at in various aspects, so it was impossible for them to lose easily. It was the same in the sword roll Divine Hall. Geniuses would appear from time to crack the sword arts of the elites ranked below the top 50. However, there were very few people who could crack the sword arts of the top 50. It has been a long time since anyone in the sword roll Divine Hall of Tianfeng Capital was able to crack the sword arts of the top 50 elites. Indeed, the strength of Tianfeng Ridge's younger generation can only be considered below average among the 360 ridges of the Sword Dynasty. The previous record was to crack the 59th rank. At that moment, almost everyone's eyes were focused on Yi Guqin. On the other side, young Master Jade's expression was ugly under the mask. Although he had cracked the sword moves of 3 phantoms up to now, they were the phantoms of elites ranked below the 80th rank. Furthermore, the speed at which he cracked them was far slower than Yi Guqin's. Where did this sword demon come from? Since when did Tianfeng Ridge have such a genius? Young Master Jade was perplexed. However, I would like to see if you can defeat Yen worried guest. Young Master Jade stared intently at Yi Guqin's back. The Su siblings were also staring at Yi Guqin's figure. Su Jingjing's beautiful eyes were unable to conceal the blazing love and adoration in them. I wonder if young Master Jade can deal with Yen worried guest? Su Jingjing asked in anticipation. It's hard to say. Although young Master Jade is strong, Yen worried guest is a top 50 elite after all. His Misty Rain illusory sword is not that easy to crack. Su Wenbin stared intently. It was not only the Su siblings. Almost all the other sword cultivators in the Divine Hall turned their attention to Yi Guqin. Even the female attendant from before wore a look of astonishment. However, she did not know that the sword demon that was the center of attention was the mortal she had looked down on. In the arena, Yi Guqin stood with his sword in hand. The figure of Yen Choku suddenly flashed, as if it had turned into a puff of green smoke, and almost instantly appeared in front of Yi Guqin. So fast! Although the surrounding sword cultivators were watching intently, they still could not see worried Smog's movements clearly. Yi Guqin stomped on the ground. His body moved as if he had teleported to Yen worried guest's side. That sword demon's movement technique isn't weak either. Everyone was surprised. What Yi Guqin displayed was naturally so close, yet worlds apart. However, because he didn't have true chi, he couldn't fully display it. The illusory figure of Yen Choku swung the flute in his hand like a sword. Wisps of illusory sword chi gushed out like misty rain. Beneath Yi Guqin's mask, his pupils shrank. If it were anyone else, they might find it difficult to defend themselves against worried Smoker's Misty Rain illusory sword. However, what sort of existence was Yi Guqin? In terms of sword skills, he was probably not inferior to supremacies or even saints. This sword art is indeed rather interesting. Unfortunately, there are still flaws. It only has the shape of a misty rain, but it lacks the intent of a misty rain, thought Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin had spent nearly 50 rounds in this battle. Compared to his previous performance, it was rather slow. However, the entire sword-ranking divine hall was dead silent. All the sword cultivators felt as though their throats were choked. They were unable to utter a single word. He cracked worried Smog's Misty Rain illusory sword in just 50 rounds? If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have never believed it. The entire divine hall seemed to be in an uproar. All the sword cultivators looked at the shattered illusory figure of Yan Choku in the arena. Their jaws nearly dropped to the ground. As a Sword Dao elite ranked in the top 50 of the sword ranking, Yan Choku's signature sword art, the Misty Rain illusory sword, had been cracked just like that. This, not to mention Skywind Ridge. Even in places where elites gather, very few people can crack the sword art of an elite ranked in the top 50, right? Many warriors were left speechless. So impressive. Su Jingjing was dumbfounded. Yes, indeed. In order to hone his sword art, young Master Jade did not use any means like quintessential energy. Instead, he used his sword art to crack the Misty Rain illusory sword. He is indeed impressive. It is truly fortunate to be able to invite him this time, said Su Wenbin with a deep sigh. In order to win the favor of Princess Qin Paisai at the Tianfeng banquet 5 days later, Su Wenbin had expended a tremendous amount of effort in order to invite this great Buddha. And young Master Jade's performance did not disappoint Su Wenbin. Instead, it was a pleasant surprise, an extremely pleasant surprise. In the arena, Yi Guqin pondered. The reason why he came to the sword-ranking divine hall, to battle the illusory figures, was to test the strength of the sword-ranking elites. Although he could not tell much from the illusory figures, the sword-ranking elites did not seem to be as strong as Yi Guqin imagined. No, it was not that the sword-ranking elites were weak, but that Yi Guqin was too strong. At the very least, in terms of sword Dao and sword techniques, Yi Guqin had left the sword-ranking elites in the dust. Let's go straight to the main point. Yi Guqin did not wish to delay any further. With a thought, the arena's array formation swirled. He could use his spiritual perception to control the array formation and choose the illusory figure he wanted to challenge. A figure shrouded in a mysterious black and white glow appeared. The figure was like water ripples, occasionally emitting a radiance that resembled the sun. At times, it would be hidden in darkness. It prevented others from seeing its true appearance. Although it was only an illusory figure, it exuded a corporeal pressure. Nearly all the sword cultivators in the temple turned silent at that moment. An unprecedented and terrifying sword aura pressure swept out in all directions. That illusory figure is. Some of the sword cultivators' eyes widened, and they could not speak clearly. Third on the sword ranking, Wuxia. With a loud bang, it was as if a huge rock had fallen into the ocean. Waves of uproar resounded in all directions. The sword demon had directly challenged the third on the sword ranking, Wuxia's illusory figure. All the sword cultivators were in an uproar. This young Master Yu is too daring, isn't he? Su Wenbin took a deep breath. Who was Wuxia? Even in the entire sword dynasty, he was an absolute top elite. It was rumored that the top 10 elites on the sword ranking were not weaker than the Sword Sun, and they were not much weaker than the elites of the Overlord forces. As expected of young Master Yu. Other than young Master Yu, who else would have such courage? Su Jingjing's beautiful eyes lit up. Earlier, they were not sure if the sword demon was young Master Yu because they did not sense his true qi cultivation. But now, it seemed that other than young Master Yu, they could not think of anyone else who had the courage and qualifications to challenge Wuxia. However, the Su siblings did not know that in another arena, the real young Master Yu's expression changed drastically. He dares to challenge Wuxia. Who is this sword demon? If there is such a genius in Skywind Ridge, why would Su Wenbin need to invite me here? Just like the Su siblings, young Master Yu was also shocked. However, the gazes of everyone present, including him, were all gathered on Yi Guqin. If the sword demon could break Wuxia's illusory figure sword move today, it would definitely shock the entire Skywind Ridge. Chapter 859. In the arena, Yi Guqin faced Hua Wuxiu's illusory figure. He could feel that Hua Wuxiu was different from the other geniuses on the sword roll. That sword aura pressure was too strong. Moreover, Hua Wuxiu's figure could not be seen clearly. It was as if this formation was not qualified to simulate Hua Wuxiu's true appearance. Hua Wuxiu's illusory figure was wrapped in black and white divine light as he slowly raised his hands. Two swords appeared from his hands. One of the swords was as blazing as the sun, while the other was completely black as if it had blended into the night. It's Hua Wuxiu's quasi-tribulation divine weapon, the light and shadow swords. Some sword cultivators were excited when they saw this scene. It had been a long time since anyone had challenged Hua Wuxiu's illusory figure in the sword roll divine palace of Tianfeng City. Yi Guqin held his sword and calmed down. Light sword daybreak. Hua Wuxiu's illusory figure flashed and appeared in front of Yi Guqin almost instantly. Yi Guqin used so close, yet so far and yet so far. However, Hua Wuxiu's illusory figure followed closely behind. The blazing light sword swept towards Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin held his sword and swung it horizontally, colliding with Hua Wuxiu's sword. An extremely strong rebounding force came from the sword, and Yi Guqin's figure suddenly retreated. Because the Sword Roll Divine Palace's arena focused on the cultivation and deciphering of sword techniques, these illusory figures' true strength was not considered strong. Even so, Yi Guqin was still pushed back. It could be seen that Hua Wuxiu was indeed a far cry from the previous geniuses. Shadow Sword, Curtain of Night. Hua Wuxiu's shadow turned his other hand, and a pitch-black sword qi gushed out, as if it had turned into a curtain of night, and enveloped Yi Guqin. Hua Wuxiu is able to use Komyo Kendo and dark swordsmanship to such perfection. He is indeed extraordinary, Yi Guqin thought to himself. Light and darkness were opposites. However, if one could completely comprehend it and even use it together, its power would increase exponentially. If he could combine the two and form the light and darkness sword Dao, it would be even more heaven-defying. However, judging from the performance of Hua Wuxiu's avatar, he wasn't far from completely integrating the light and darkness sword Dao. Even so, it was unrealistic for a mere shadow sword move to stump Yi Guqin. With Yi Guqin's monstrous talent in the way of the sword, Hua Wuxiu's sword moves were not unbreakable. Clang! Yi Guqin seized the opportunity and inserted his sword blade between Hua Wuxiu's light and shadow swords. What he wanted to do was to destroy the balance between light and darkness. In this way, the sword moves would be broken. Just as Yi Guqin was focused on breaking Hua Wuxiu's sword moves, the surrounding sword cultivators were all stunned, and their minds buzzed. They didn't expect Yi Guqin to be able to fight Hua Wuxiu's shadow on par with him. Since when did Tianfeng Ridge have such a monstrous talent? I'm really curious. Who exactly is this sword demon? Could he be one of the top elites on the sword roll? Maybe he's one of the elites from the 5 major academies. While everyone was guessing, Yi Guqin had already fought hundreds of rounds with Hua Wuxiu's shadow. At a certain moment, Yi Guqin suddenly seized an opportunity, and with a shake of his sword, he swung the sword in Hua Wuxiu's shadow's hand away. The light and darkness sword move was broken. Boom! There was a deafening sound, and the entire sword roll shrine seemed to tremble. Hua Wuxiu's shadow seemed to take a deep look at Yi Guqin. Then it shattered into specks of light. The air seemed to have frozen, and all the sword cultivators present seemed to have stopped breathing. Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing trembled, and they looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. They knew that young Master Yu was very strong, but they didn't expect him to be so strong. Even Hua Wuxiu's sword moves were broken. If this news were to spread, the entire Tianfeng Ridge would be shocked. Oh my god, he really broke it. Is this sword demon also one of the top 10 elites on the sword roll? After a short moment of dead silence, there was a deafening uproar. How is this possible? On the other side of the arena, young Master Yu's body had already stiffened, as if he had been struck by lightning. Even if he was a genius on the sword roll, it was almost impossible for him to break Hua Wuxiu's sword moves, because the gap between them was too big. But now he saw Hua Wuxiu's sword move being broken with his own eyes. While the audience was in an uproar, Yi Guqin himself was calm. It's about time. Yi Guqin didn't plan to continue fighting. Moreover, After challenging Wuxia, he discovered that there were no sword moves left behind by the first and second rankers on the sword roll in the shrine. There was no point in staying any longer. Yi Guqin's figure flashed, and he left from the back pavilion. On the other side, young Master Yu's eyes flashed, and he followed closely behind. However, when young Master Yu reached the back pavilion, he didn't see Yi Guqin's figure. He left so quickly. Who is he? Young Master Yu's face was solemn. He took off his mask and black robe. But at this moment, Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing entered the back pavilion. It's really young Master Yu. Seeing young Master Yu's figure, Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing's eyes lit up, and there was a strong sense of respect in their eyes. Young Master Yu, I didn't expect you to be so secretive. This way, young Master Yu will be unparalleled in the Heavenly Wind Grand Banquet. Su Wenbin said respectfully. Young Master Yu, Jingjing really admires you. Su Jingjing's beautiful eyes were also filled with passion. You've misunderstood. Young Master Yu's face turned slightly ugly under the hood. These two people actually mistook him for the sword demon. Young Master Yu naturally wouldn't admit it. The Su siblings were taken aback, but in an instant, a smile appeared on their faces. As expected of young Master Yu, so humble and low-key, the Su siblings sighed in their hearts. However, they knew that today's matter would spread throughout the entire Heavenly Wind City, and even the Heavenly Wind Ridge. Therefore, even if young Master Yu wanted to keep a low profile, he wouldn't be able to. As expected, in just half a day, the news of the sword-ranking Divine Temple swept through the entire Heavenly Wind City, like a hurricane. Hey, did you hear? Someone managed to break Wuxia's sword move in the sword-ranking Divine Temple. I heard that it's someone called the Sword Demon. TSK, I wonder who he is. That's Wuxia we're talking about. Not to mention the Heavenly Wind Ridge, even in the entire 360 ridges, those who can break Wuxia's sword move can be counted on one hand, right? This sword demon has caused quite a stir. I'm really curious about his identity. Could it be that he's a genius from an overlord faction, who came to our sword dynasty to train? Almost everyone in the Heavenly Wind City was talking about the sword demon. Outside the sword-ranking Divine Temple, a thin figure wearing a bamboo hat stood among the crowd. Not only did he break my Misty Rain illusory sword, he even broke Wuxia's sword move. Who is this sword demon? The figure smiled faintly, and his body dissipated like smoke. Am I hallucinating? A sword cultivator rubbed his eyes and muttered. Chapter 860. Just as Sword Demon's name shook Tianfeng City. In a large hall of the Grand Lord's mansion in Tianfeng City, Han Lingxian was chatting with a young lady. The young lady was dressed in a pale yellow dress. She had an exquisite figure, an oval face, slender eyebrows, and snow-white skin. She looked extraordinarily beautiful. She was the daughter of the Tianfeng Grand Lord, Princess Qin Paisai. Sister Lingxian, the Tianfeng feast will be held in 5 days. You must come, Qin Paisai said with a smile. Han Lingxian had met Qin Paisai by chance when she was traveling in the Sword Dynasty. The two of them became best friends. I have a friend who wants to participate. Han Lingxian hesitated before telling Qin Paisai about Yi Guqin. He has no cultivation? Qin Paisai's beautiful face froze when she heard the news. In this world, strength was the most important thing. In a top dynasty like the Sword Dynasty, strength was even more important. If one had strength, like those on the sword ranking, they would be respected and admired wherever they went. However, if one did not have strength, no one would care. Hence, when Qin Paisai heard that Yi Guqin had no cultivation, she did not show much curiosity or enthusiasm. Han Lingxian smiled bitterly and said, Paisai, although young Master Dugu has no cultivation at the moment, his understanding of the sword Dao is very strong. His physical strength alone is enough to defeat a stage 5 or stage 6 heaven's favorite. Physical strength is just a side path. Cultivation is the right path. However, for Sister Lingshuan's sake, I can let him participate in the Tianfeng feast and the 5 academy selection. As long as he does not drag us down, it will be fine, Qin Paisai said. Thank you, Han Lingxian said. At this moment, An old housekeeper rushed into the hall and cupped his hands at Qin Paisai. Miss, something big has happened. Why are you so anxious? Qin Paisai frowned. The sword-ranking divine palace sent news that a sword cultivator called Sword Demon has broken Hua Wuxia's sword technique. The old housekeeper said. What? Qin Paisai's jade-like hand slapped the armrest of her chair, and she couldn't help but stand up. Her beautiful eyes widened, revealing an extremely shocked and incredulous expression. Who is this sword demon? He's actually able to break Hua Wuxia's sword technique? Qin Paisai couldn't suppress the astonishment in her heart. Generally speaking, most of the people who went to the sword-ranking divine palace to hone their sword skills were from the younger generation. People from the older generation rarely went. Therefore, in Qin Paisai's eyes, this sword demon was most likely a young genius. Being able to break Hua Wuxia's sword move meant that this sword demon had extraordinary talent and strength. Hua Wuxia's sword technique has been countered. Han Lingxian was also astonished when she heard this. Did the sword-ranking divine palace leave behind that sword demon? Qin Paisai's breathing quickened. If he could recruit this sword demon. If that was the case, Tianfeng Ridge would have nothing to fear in the selection of the 5 academies. No, that sword demon disappeared without a trace. I don't know where he went. The old butler sighed. Damn it. Qin Paisai stomped her foot. Her pretty face was filled with regret. Paisai, why are you so anxious? Han Lingxian asked when she saw the strange expression on Qin Paisai's face. If no one from Tianfeng Ridge can enter the 5 academies in the selection of the 5 academies, my father may be removed from his position as lord by the Sword Dao Alliance. How can I not be anxious? Qin Paisai bit her lip. The lords of the 360 ridges of the Sword Dynasty were all appointed by the Sword Dao Alliance. However, if there were no outstanding geniuses in a lord's territory for a long time and they couldn't enter the 5 academies, then that lord would be considered incompetent. He would be questioned and even removed from his position. Not only did Tianfeng Ridge not have many outstanding geniuses, but it was also targeted by the Purple Smoke Ridge and Yellow Dragon Ridge. Therefore, it hadn't had any results in the past few years. That Purple Smoke Territorial Lord and Yellow Dragon Territorial Lord are trying to remove my father from his position, just because he's a loose cultivator and refuses to join their aristocratic family's faction. This time we can't let them succeed. Qin Paisai clenched her teeth. Young Master Dugu and I will help you, Han Lingxian said. Qin Paisai shook her head and sighed. She didn't say anything. In her eyes, not to mention Yi Guqin, who had no cultivation, even a 5th-stage prodigy like Han Lingxian wouldn't be of much help. That Su Wenbin said he would give me a surprise during the Tianfeng banquet. I wonder what it is. Qin Paisai thought to herself. After a day, the sword demon's name continued to spread like wildfire in the prairie. Yi Guqin, who was at the center of the eye of the storm, had been staying in the inn. Although he had broken Hua Wuxia's sword move, Yi Guqin wasn't complacent. That sword move was definitely not Hua Wuxia's trump card. Moreover, a mere shadow couldn't prove anything. I'm looking forward to fighting with those prodigies on the sword ranking. Yi Guqin thought to himself. However, the most important thing right now was to recover his Qi Si and spiritual Si. Yi Guqin estimated that if he could obtain the Saint Medicine to recover his Qi Si, he might be able to break through to the Spirit Bridge stage. After all, he had accumulated enough in the life and death chamber, and had experienced many life and death battles. Now was the best time to break through. However, Saint Medicine was too hard to find. Moreover, Yi Guqin was poor and couldn't buy Saint Medicine. At this moment, Han Lingxian just happened to return. With a faint smile on her face she said, Young Master Dugu, come with me to the Tianfeng banquet in 5 days. Sure, but I'll have to trouble you to inquire about the Saint Medicine for me. Yi Guqin cupped his hands. Of course. Han Lingxian nodded and said. Young Master Dugu, you should have heard of the sword demon's name, right? Yi Guqin's eyes were filled with doubt. After returning from the sword ranking temple, Yi Guqin had been staying in the inn and hadn't taken a step out. Therefore, he didn't know that his casual action had caused such a stir in the entire Tianfeng city. Young Master Dugu, Don't you know that the sword demon in the sword-ranking temple broke Hua Wuxia's sword move? Han Lingxian said with a face full of admiration. So what if he broke Hua Wuxia's sword move? Yi Guchen's face was indifferent. He didn't think that breaking this sword move was a big deal. Han Lingxian heard this and was stunned. Breaking Hua Wuxia's sword move, ranked third on the sword ranking, wasn't a big deal? It was definitely a big deal. Young Master Dugu, you should know Hua Wuxia's status in the Sword Dynasty. The fact that the sword demon could break his sword move is enough to make him famous in the Sword Dynasty. Han Lingxian said in a deep voice. She admired Yi Guchen's talent in the sword Dao. However, this wasn't the reason why Yi Guchen could ignore Hua Wuxia and the sword demon. I don't think it's a big deal, Yi Guchen said. In Yi Guchen's opinion, this matter was not worth mentioning. Alright then, young Master Dugu, have a good rest and prepare for the Tianfeng feast in 5 days. Han Lingxian said and left the room. Han Lingxian felt a little uncomfortable with Yi Guchen's arrogant attitude. She originally had a good impression of Yi Guchen, but at this moment, she felt that Yi Guchen was a little arrogant. Yi Guchen didn't care about Han Lingxian's attitude. Tianfeng feast. I wonder if there's a chance to obtain the Saint Elixir? Yi Guchen muttered to himself. If he could obtain the Saint Elixir and break through to the Spirit Bridge stage. Yi Guchen was confident. Even in the Sword Dynasty, with a sword in hand, he could make everyone bow down. Chapter 861. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. The commotion caused by the sword demon had yet to subside. Not only that, but the entire Skywind Ridge and even the surrounding areas had begun to spread the name of the sword demon. Many people were curious as to who the sword demon was to be able to easily break the sword techniques of the sword rankings prodigy, and even Hua Wuxia's sword techniques. There were rumors that the sword demon was one of the top 10 prodigies on the sword ranking. There were also people who guessed that the sword demon was a prodigy from an overlord-level force who had come to the Sword Dynasty to gain experience. Of course, more people were curious as to whether the rumored sword demon would participate in the Skywind feast. Time's up, young Master Dugu. Let's go to the feast. Han Lingxian smiled faintly. Although Yi Guchen's seemingly arrogant attitude made Han Lingxian a little unhappy. But with Han Lingxian's character, she obviously wouldn't neglect Yi Guchen because of this. At least, Yi Guchen had helped the Han family, Yi Guchen and Han Lingxian. So Han Lingxian would do her best to help Yi Guchen. Okay. Yi Guchen nodded. But you still need to cover your face a little. If Hua Tingfei is present during the 5 academies selection, he will be able to recognize you at a glance. Han Lingxian was very considerate. Yi Guchen had just arrived at the Sword Dynasty, so no one knew him yet. It was obviously the best time to cover his face. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. He didn't cover his face because he was afraid of Hua Tingfei. It was because Yi Guchen was too famous in the South Horizon region. Plus he had the immemorial demon sword. Even if he was a dead person in everyone's eyes, it would still cause a commotion if someone with a similar face appeared. Although the Sword Dynasty was far away from the Saint Origin Dynasty, people here shouldn't be able to recognize him. However, it was better to be safe than sorry. Therefore, Yi Guchen decided to completely conceal his true appearance and walk around as a Dugu Wu Bai. The two of them left the inn. Yi Guchen bought an appearance-changing mask and put it on. This mask also had the effect of isolating one's divine soul from probing. Even after changing his appearance, Yi Guchen's face was still very delicate and pretty. It was less sharp and more reserved. After that, the two of them headed straight for the location of the Tianfeng banquet. The location of the Heavenly Wind banquet was located in the Qingfeng Garden in the south of Heavenly Wind City. In less than 15 minutes, Yi Guchen and Han Lingxian arrived at Qingfeng Garden. Qingfeng Garden covered a large area, with green pines and green cypresses, jade grasses and exotic flowers. The scenery was pleasant. There were already numerous young elites gathered at the entrance, and they entered in a single file. The Tianfeng Grand Banquet was a gathering of geniuses organized by the Tianfeng Ridge before the selection of the 5 academies. Therefore, the participants were all geniuses who were quite famous in the Tianfeng Ridge. Han Lingxian scanned the crowd with her beautiful eyes. and there was a hint of surprise in her eyes. She was at level 5 of the Heaven and Earth Spiritual Bridge, and was considered one of the top 3 geniuses in the Yun dynasty. However, even the weakest person here was at least at level 3 or level 4. Level 5 was considered normal. There was no lack of level 6 geniuses. The Sword Dynasty is indeed impressive. Han Lingxian sighed in her heart. The Tianfeng Ridge was only one ridge, but the number of geniuses here was already greater than the Yun dynasty. It was hard to imagine how magnificent the scene would be when all the geniuses from all 360 ridges gathered at the same place during the selection of the 5 academies. While thinking, Han Lingxian and Yi Guqin walked to the entrance of Qingfeng Garden. Do you have an invitation? The guard at the entrance glanced suspiciously at Yi Guqin. The guard could sense that Han Lingxian was at level 5. However, Yi Guqin did not have any aura, as if he was an ordinary person. How could such a person be qualified to attend the Tianfeng feast? Yes. Han Lingxian took out 2 invitation cards. When the guard saw this, he said arrogantly, "Since you have an invitation card, then go in. However, if you are not strong enough, you will only be humiliating yourself if you attend the Tianfeng feast." You. Han Lingxian frowned, but Yi Guqin patted Han Lingshuan's shoulder. Go in. Yi Guqin did not mind at all. Han Lingshuan's beautiful face turned cold. She glanced at the guard and entered with Yi Guqin. Inside Qingfeng Garden, there were richly ornamented buildings and winding paths. There was also a crystal-clear lake that was as calm as a mirror, like a sapphire. At this moment, a banquet had already been set up by the lake, and delicacies were served on the table. The young men and women coming and going all had extraordinary auras. Obviously, the people gathered here were the elites of Tianfeng Ridge's younger generation. A prodigy at Han Lingshuan's level wasn't weak, but she definitely wasn't outstanding either. As for Yi Guqin in the eyes of others, he was like a transparent person, without any aura at all. The female sword cultivator from the Zhuoqiu family, Zhuoqiuqing, is here. A young girl in red entered Qingfeng Garden, attracting everyone's attention. The young girl's close-fitting clothes outlined the curves of her slender body. Although she did not have any sexy curves, she was well-proportioned and soft. Her long black hair was tied into a ponytail, and she did not have any makeup on her face. She looked valiant and formidable. Although she was a young girl, her aura was not inferior to that of a man. She carried a sword on her back, and her bright eyes made many people shrink back with fear in their eyes. Zhuoqiuqing's appearance was attractive. However, in Tianfeng Ridge, Zhuoqiuqing was also famous for being a battle maniac. That young girl is Zhuoqiuqing from the Zhuoqiu family, a 6th-stage Heaven and Earth Spiritual Bridge prodigy. Her strength is extraordinary, Han Lingxian said with a solemn expression. Although Zhuoqiuqing was not on the sword roll, she was already one of the top prodigies in Tianfeng Ridge. Where's the sword demon? Where's the sword demon who broke Hua Wuxia's sword move in the sword roll divine palace? Is that you? Zhuoqiuqing grabbed a young man's collar. No, Miss Zhuoqiu, you've got the wrong person. The young man hurriedly waved his hand, afraid that Zhuoqiuqing would use him for practice. Is that you? Or is it you? Zhuoqiuqing pointed at 2 or 3 people. Those who were pointed at shook their heads like rattles. In Tianfeng Ridge, many prodigies had been trampled by Zhuoqiuqing. Other than prodigies of the same level, no one else dared to provoke her. Zhuoqiuqing kept grabbing people and asking them questions, but everyone shook their heads in denial. Suddenly, Yi Guqin felt a gust of fragrance. He looked up and saw Zhuoqiuqing standing in front of him. Are you the sword demon? Zhuoqiuqing asked casually. Han Lingshuan's expression changed slightly when she saw this. She was afraid that Zhuoqiuqing would cause trouble for Yi Guqin, so she hurriedly said, Miss Zhuoqiu, you've misunderstood. This is my friend. How could he be the sword demon? That's right. He doesn't have any cultivation base. Zhuoqiuqing finally realized that Yi Guqin did not have any aura at all. Even a mortal is participating in the Tianfeng banquet. Zhuoqiuqing muttered, and stopped paying attention to Yi Guqin. However, at this moment, a faint voice suddenly sounded. Stop looking. With the sword demon's monstrous talent, he's comparable to the top prodigies on the sword roll. How could he possibly be interested in our Tianfeng banquet? A young man in a blue robe with a sword at his waist said calmly, "It's the boundless swordsman Zhen Lang. He's here." A commotion broke out in all directions. Chapter 862. There were many famous people among the younger generation of Tianfeng Ridge. For example, Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing from the Su family and Zhuoqiuqing from the Zhuoqiu family. There was also the blue-robed young man, Zhen Lang. He was not a member of an aristocratic family, but a lone cultivator. By chance, he had obtained the inheritance of a supremacy who specialized in the water sword Dao and rose to prominence. Although he did not enter the sword ranking, he was considered one of the top prodigies in Tianfeng Ridge. Oh, you mean that the sword demon looks down on the prodigies of Tianfeng Ridge? Zhuoqiuqing's eyes were filled with battle intent. It was obvious that she wanted to meet the legendary sword demon. Of course. The sword demon is able to break Hua Wuxia's sword technique. Even if he's not as strong as Hua Wuxia, he's at least comparable to the top 10 on the sword ranking. Would such a person deign to attend the Tianfeng banquet? Zhen Lang sneered. Zhuoqiuqing rolled her eyes. That made sense. Tianfeng Ridge could only be considered below average among the 360 ridges in the Sword Dynasty. In the past Tianfeng banquet, not a single prodigy on the sword ranking had appeared. Since the sword demon could break Hua Wuxia's sword technique, he should be a talented sword cultivator. It was normal that he did not want to attend the Tianfeng banquet. What a pity. I'd like to meet the sword demon and see who he is, Zhuoqiuqing said regretfully. With the arrival of Zhuoqiuqing and Zhen Lang, the atmosphere of the Tianfeng banquet became even livelier. At this moment, Han Lingxian suddenly felt a gaze crawling on her body like a caterpillar. Han Lingxian looked in the direction of the gaze, and saw a sloppy and frivolous young man staring at her without any hesitation. Han Lingxian felt disgusted and approached Yi Guqin. "Oh, this beauty looks unfamiliar. Are you not from Tianfeng Ridge?" The young man walked closer to Han Lingxian, as if he didn't recognize anyone. "It's Su House from the Su family. Which prey is he eyeing now?" TSK, looks like another girl is going to be harmed by Su House. Who told him to be a member of the Su family? When the surrounding people saw the young man, their eyes were secretly filled with disdain. However, due to the background of Su House Su family, they couldn't say anything. The Su family and the Zhuoqiu family were both great aristocratic families in the Tianfeng Ridge. Although they did not join the Sword Principal Alliance, they were not to be trifled with. "I don't know you." Han Lingxian gritted her teeth. She also knew that this young man was from the Su family, and was not someone to be trifled with. Although she was angry, she did not release it. Su House's eye sockets were sunken, and his body was thin. It was as if his body had been hollowed out by wine and women. His cultivation was only at the 3rd level of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. If it wasn't for the Su clan's background, he would have been beaten to death long ago. "Hey beauty, there's no need to treat me like an outsider. Even if we don't know each other, we can still get to know each other. I'm Su House from the Su clan. After the Tianfeng banquet, why don't I invite you for a gathering?" Su House smiled frivolously. "No need." Han Lingxian held Yi Guqin's arm. "Well, isn't he your servant?" Su House glanced at Yi Guqin and sneered. He did not feel a trace of aura from Yi Guqin's body, so he was most likely just an ordinary person. "Shut up, young Master Dugu is not someone you can slander." Han Lingxuan's expression changed. "What young Master Dugu? You're just a cripple. Get out of my way. How can a fresh flower be stuck in cow dung?" Su House raised his hand and grabbed at Yi Guqin. Although his cultivation was not good, it was more than enough to deal with an ordinary person. "Miss Han, sometimes there's no need to endure anything," Yi Guqin said lightly. Before Han Lingxian could react, Yi Guqin dodged and grabbed Su House's arm. He pulled hard and then clenched his other hand into a fist. He gathered ancient god power and punched at Su House's chest. "Poochie." Su House's eyes bulged and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Yi Guqin turned his body sideways to avoid the blood. He turned his fist into a palm and slapped Su House's face. "Pa." Su House was knocked to the ground. His teeth flew out, and his cheeks were bruised. Yi Guchen took advantage of the situation and stomped on Su Hao's chest. Crack! A series of bone-cracking sounds could be heard. Blood gushed out of Su Hao's mouth, and he screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Finally, Yi Guchen kicked Su Hao into the rockery in the distance. With a loud bang, the rockery exploded. Su Hao was covered in dust and his head was bleeding. Dead silence. The originally noisy Qingfeng garden quieted down because of this unforeseen event. Zuoqiuqing, Zhenlang, and the others looked at Yi Guchen with surprise. That young man beat Su Hao half to death. From the looks of it, they should be from another place. This time they're in trouble. Many Skywind Ridge elites whispered to each other, but there were also some who were surprised. That person didn't have a trace of cultivation. He defeated Su Hao with brute force. What a strong physical strength. No matter how weak Su Hao is, he's still a stage 3 prodigy. How could he be defeated so easily? Even I can make mistakes? Zuoqiuqing glanced at Yi Guchen. Just now, she thought that Yi Guchen was just a mortal without any martial arts cultivation. Now, it seemed that although Yi Guchen didn't have a cultivation, his physical strength was extraordinary. It was comparable to a stage 3 or 4 prodigy. However, Zuoqiuqing didn't care. She was just a little surprised. Damn it. You're dead. My big brother and big sister will be here soon. No matter who you are, you're dead. Su Hao collapsed on the ground and spat out blood. At the same time he cursed. Han Lingxian clenched her teeth and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, young Master Dugu. It's all because of me that you're in trouble." "It's fine. It's just a fly." Yi Guchen didn't care. Right at that moment, 3 figures entered Qingfeng Garden. The man and woman in the lead were Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing from the Su family. The hooded young master followed behind the 2 of them. His aura was extremely heavy. The Su siblings are here. What a coincidence. Some of the surrounding elites looked as if they were waiting to watch a good show. Big brother, big sister, save me. Su Hao wailed as he collapsed on the ground. What happened? Su Wenbin's face darkened. When they saw Su Hao, who was covered in blood and had a swollen face like a pig's head, their mouths twitched. Who did this? Su Wenbin's gaze turned cold. Although he hated the troublemaker Su Hao, he was still a member of the Su family. No matter what Su Hao had done, he should not be treated like this for the sake of Buddha. Many people's eyes fell on Yi Guchen. Su Jingjing glanced at Yi Guchen and found that there was no fluctuation of true qi on his body. Her eyes were filled with suspicion. Did you do this? Big sister, that brat's physical strength is extraordinary. You have to help me. Su Hao roared with a face full of hatred. If that's the case, kowtow and apologize. Our Su family isn't something a foreigner like you can mess with, Su Wenbin said indifferently. He was familiar with almost all of the younger generation in Tianfeng Ridge. When he saw Yi Guchen's unfamiliar appearance, he knew that he must be a foreigner. Han Lingxian gritted her teeth slightly. She could feel that the Su siblings' cultivation auras were even stronger than hers. Just as she was about to apologize, Yi Guchen said coldly, "Are all members of the Su family so stupid?" As soon as he said this, the expressions of all the elites in Qingfeng Garden changed. Chapter 863. The Su family was not one of the prominent families in the Sword Dao Alliance. However, they were an overlord in the Skywind Ridge and had a good reputation. In the Skywind Ridge, no one dared to provoke the Su family. Not to mention that the Su siblings were both at the 6th stage of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. If they entered the 5 academies in the future, the Su family's power would undoubtedly skyrocket. Under such circumstances, there was still someone who dared to provoke the Su family. Moreover, it was a mortal from outside the Skywind Ridge with no cultivation. It was no wonder that the surrounding geniuses were dumbfounded. In their eyes, Yi Guchen's behavior was no different from courting death. Haha, how interesting. Jingjing, do you think the sun rose from the west today? Su Wenbin was so angry that he laughed and shook his head. It was Su Wenbin's first time being targeted like this. The more ignorant a person is, the more arrogant he is. Su Jingjing's tone was harsh. Behind them, young Master Yu, who who was hidden in the hood, looked at Han Lingxian and his eyes lit up. He had to admit that Han Lingxian was indeed a rare beauty. Haha, but you have to pay the price for saying the wrong thing, don't you think? Su Wenbin's robe fluttered even though there was no wind. He walked step by step toward Yi Guqin and emitted the aura of a six-stage spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. Is this guy going to make a move? Zhuo Qiuqing looked like she was watching a show. On the other side, Zheng Lang also glanced at him. This brat who only relied on his physical strength was going to be unlucky. Is everyone in the Su family so unreasonable? Han Lingxian was also angry. She took a step back, but the Su family took a step forward. Since you're from outside the Skywind Ridge, you should know who you shouldn't provoke the most. Su Wenbin's tone to Han Lingxian was not too harsh. He turned to look at Yi Guqin with a playful look. Obviously, he wanted to teach Yi Guqin a lesson. Yi Guqin stood calmly in the face of Su Wenbin's aura. He did not feel anything. If Su Wenbin dared to make a move, he would not mind teaching Su Wenbin an unforgettable lesson. However, at this moment, an Oreo-like voice rang out. Young Master Su, that's enough. Sister Lingxian is my friend. If you bully her, you're not giving me any face. A young girl in a light yellow dress walked over. She had an oval face, almond-shaped eyes, peach cheeks, and an exquisite figure. She had a beautiful and noble temperament. She was the princess of Tianfeng Ridge, Qin Paisai. Pei. Seeing Qin Paisai's arrival, Su Wenbin's fierce aura immediately dissipated without a trace. On his handsome face, there was a hint of gentleness. The elites present did not find this strange. They all knew that Su Wenbin had always been pursuing Qin Paisai. If I had known that this lady was your friend, I wouldn't have acted like this. However, it's a fact that my cousin was injured. Su Wenbin smiled faintly. He was the one who started it. Han Lingxian frowned slightly. Alright, Sister Lingxian, young Master Su, for my sake, both of you should take a step back. Qin Paisai said. Alright, for your sake, I'll spare this mortal. Su Wenbin glanced at Yi Guqin indifferently. Qin Paisai noticed the figure behind Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing, and a trace of surprise flashed in her eyes. Previously, Su Wenbin had promised her that he would find a helper for her to help Tianfeng Ridge achieve better results in the enrollment of the 5 colleges. It should be this person. I can't see through him. However, I can't offend him too much. Thinking of this, Qin Paisai could not help but say to Han Lingxian, Sister Lingxian, let's forget about this matter. However, please ask your friend to restrain himself. After all, this is the Sword Dynasty, not the Qian Dynasty. Even if he has some ability, he won't be able to cause any trouble. What she meant was that although Yi Guqin's physical strength was outstanding, and he had some ability, however, in front of a group of geniuses, he was still not presentable. Han Lingxuan's expression did not look too good. After all, Yi Guqin had taken action because of her. Got it. Han Lingxian nodded slightly. Yi Guqin looked on indifferently from the side, and did not say anything. At that moment, a strong pressure suddenly appeared in the entire Qingfeng garden. A middle-aged man in a brocade robe stepped in the air. His face was upright and he looked dignified. It's Lord Tianfeng. Greetings, Lord Tianfeng. Seeing the man in the brocade robe, all the geniuses in Qingfeng Garden cupped their hands slightly. Is that the Heavenly Wind Grand Lord? Yi Guqin looked over. He could sense that Lord Tianfeng's cultivation was around the 5th heaven of the honorable realm. Previously, Yi Guqin had heard from Han Lingxian that in order to become the lord of a ridge, one had to be at least an honorable realm. In that case, not to mention the honorables of the Sword Principal Alliance. In total, there were at least 360 supremacies in the 360 ridges. This was an extremely shocking number. No wonder the Sword Dynasty could become the #1 dynasty in the South Horizon region. Yi Guqin sighed inwardly. Lord Tianfeng's name was Qin Zhen. He looked around and said with a smile, You are all the young geniuses of my Tianfeng Ridge. In a few days you will participate in the recruitment of the 5 academies. I hope that you will do your best and bring glory to my Tianfeng Ridge. We will not disappoint Lord Tianfeng. Many geniuses cupped their hands together. Then the Tianfeng feast officially begins. Qin Zhen waved his hand. All kinds of delicacies, medicinal dishes, and spiritual herbs were served on the table. The Tianfeng feast was a mobilization meeting before the recruitment of the 5 academies. Qin Zhen even came personally to explain the details of the recruitment of the 5 academies to the geniuses present. All the geniuses listened attentively. Yi Guqin was the only one who kept stuffing food into his mouth. It wasn't that Yi Guqin was greedy, but that these medicinal dishes all had healing effects. Yi Guqin lacked this the most now. All the medicinal dishes that entered Yi Guqin's body were directly devoured by the demonic qi, and turned into the purest energy to nourish his body. However, in the eyes of others, this scene seemed a little low-level. As expected, he's from a foreign land and has never seen the world. Su Jingjing couldn't help but sneer. Even Qin Zhen frowned slightly. Among the geniuses present, perhaps only Yi Guqin was not listening to him. However, after discovering that Yi Guqin had no cultivation, Qin Zhen no longer paid attention to him. But in fact, Yi Guqin was absolutely confident that he could enter the 5 academies, so he didn't care too much about these details. Everyone, for those who have performed outstandingly in the recruitment of the 5 academies, I will reward them with a sacred medicine, a spirit bodhi. I hope that everyone will work hard, Qin Zhen said. As soon as these words came out, the eyes of many of the geniuses present surged with passion. A rare item like a sacred medicine was not something that could be obtained casually. Qin Zhen's actions undoubtedly gave all the geniuses a shot of adrenaline, making them even more excited. Oh spirit bodhi! Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. This sacred medicine was suitable for recovering his qi. On the other side, the corners of young Master Yu's mouth curled up into a faint smile. This spirit bodhi belongs to me. Chapter 864. The atmosphere in Qingfeng Garden was lively. After Qin Zhen finished explaining the selection of the 5 academies, many of the elites present began to eat heartily. As they toasted, many youths also expressed their goodwill to Han Lingxian. After all, Han Lingxian was not weak, and she was beautiful and had a good figure. Moreover, she was friends with the princess, so she naturally attracted some people's attention. However, Han Lingxian did not care about these people and stayed by Yi Guqin's side. Some people could not help but look at Yi Guqin with a trace of contempt and jealousy. Qin Paisai walked over with a wine cup and clinked glasses with Han Lingxian. Then she looked at Yi Guqin's handsome face and teased, "Sister Lingxian, he said he's your friend, but he's not your toy boy, is he? What nonsense are you talking about? Young Master Dugu is not that kind of person." Han Lingxian hurriedly waved her hand, her face slightly red. She could not help but think of the time at the Imperial Sword Tablet. Even the phantom of her Han family ancestor had knelt to Yi Guqin. Even if such a person was quiet now, who could say for sure what would happen in the future? "Hey, looks like Zhuoqiuqing is itching for a fight," Qin Paisai suddenly said. There was also an arena by the side of the crystal-clear sapphire lake. After all, the Tianfeng feast was not just a gathering for dining. Some of the young elites would also spar with each other. Zhuoqiuqing leaped onto the arena. She was dressed in red and looked valiant. She unsheathed the long sword on her back and held it in her hand. "Zhenlang, we haven't fought in a long time. Let's spar." Zhuoqiuqing's eyes were filled with battle intent. Sigh. Zhenlang shook his head slightly and flashed onto the arena. He also took out a long blue sword that looked like an ice crystal. The 2 famous geniuses of Tianfeng Ridge immediately engaged in a fierce battle. The intense battle and the skillful swordsmanship couldn't help but cause the surrounding elites to burst into cheers. Even Qin Paisai and Han Lingxian could not take their eyes off them. Yi Guqin was uninterested. He picked up a cup of medicinal wine brewed from a quasi-divine medicine, and drank it alone. Seeing this, Qin Paisai couldn't help but feel that Han Lingshuan's friend was a little interesting. He was clearly a mortal without any cultivation, but he always gave people a sense of mystery. "Young Master Dugu, right? What do you think of their sword techniques?" Qin Paisai asked. Yi Guqin lifted his eyelids and said calmly, "It's passable." Actually, in Yi Guqin's eyes, this was still a good thing. Both of their swordsmanship had many flaws. In comparison, Although the geniuses on the sword ranking also had flaws, they were obviously much better than these two. However, Qin Paisai could not help but laugh when she heard this. She said to Han Lingxian, "Sister Lingxian, your friend is really arrogant but incompetent." The outstanding geniuses of Tianfeng Ridge seemed to be nothing in his eyes. Young Master Duga's comprehension of swordsmanship is amazing. It's just that he doesn't have genuine qi cultivation. Han Lingxian explained. Is that so? Qin Paisai smiled and did not say anything else. In the end, Zhuo Qiuqing and Zhen Lang ended in a draw. In fact, they did not completely reveal their trump cards. They were going to use their full strength during the 5 academies selection. Next, it was Su Wenbin's turn to enter the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been practicing a royal-level sword art recently, and I've gained some understanding of it. So, I'd like to ask for your guidance. Su Wenbin lifted his chin slightly. His words were humble, but his face could not hide his pride. He looked at Qin Paisai from time to time. Obviously, he wanted to show off his strength in front of the person he admired. Then Su Wenbin took out his sword and began to attack. He was using a lower royal-level swordsmanship, the startling rainbow swordsmanship. The sword momentum was as dazzling as the 9 heavens. The sword radiance was as dazzling as a rainbow. What a gorgeous swordsmanship! Qin Paisai was slightly fascinated by the scene. Su Wenbin was originally a handsome man. When he wielded his sword, he was extremely free and easy. Coupled with the dazzling sword radiance, he was unparalleled. Young Master Su is so handsome. He's worthy of being the top genius of Tianfeng Ridge. Many girls present were fascinated by the scene. Su Jingjing puffed out her chest and said proudly, "Big brother's swordsmanship is extraordinary." Even Han Lingxian, who disliked the Su family, had a faint look of amazement in her eyes. Su Wenbin's swordsmanship was indeed eye-catching. Qin Paisai suddenly looked at Yi Guqin with a playful smile on her face. She asked, "Young Master Dugu, you said that Zhuo Qiuqing and the other swordsmanship was barely passable. May I ask how young Master Su's swordsmanship is?" Qin Paisai was actually teasing Yi Guqin with her question. Didn't you look down on Zhuo Qiuqing and the other swordsmanship? However, Su Wenbin's swordsmanship was now praised by all the geniuses present. Are you going to go against your conscience and say that it's barely passable? Yi Guqin sipped his medicinal wine with a calm expression. He did not answer directly. Young Master Dugu, are you speechless? Qin Paisai asked with a smile. Do you really want me to say it? Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows slightly. Just say it, Qin Paisai said. It's unsightly. Yi Guqin said coldly and continued to drink his wine. The smile on Qin Paisai's face froze. Some of the surrounding geniuses were also stunned. Yi Guqin did not conceal his voice, so his words were directly heard by everyone around him. Unsightly? Some of the geniuses thought they were hallucinating. Su Wenbin's dreamlike swordsmanship made everyone gasp in amazement and immerse themselves in it. However, Yi Guqin actually said that it was unsightly? You're just a country bumpkin. What nonsense are you talking about? Su Jingjing gritted her teeth in anger and shouted. He's just a frog at the bottom of a well. Su House, who was severely injured, did not leave. After taking a healing elixir, he was still there, but his face was bruised and swollen. At this moment, he was also scolding Yi Guqin. I thought that this person was a little interesting, but now it seems that his taste is limited. Zhuo Qiuqing shook her head slightly. Even she felt that there was nothing wrong with Su Wenbin's swordsmanship. Yi Guqin was just a mere mortal. What right did he have to comment? Qin Zhen, who was sitting in the main seat, looked indifferent. He looked away after glancing at Yi Guqin. This kind of claptrap was not unheard of in the past Tianfeng grand banquets. Ha! How interesting. A cripple dares to boast so shamelessly? Su Wenbin was so angry that he laughed and stared coldly at Yi Guqin. He had displayed his strength in order to gain Qin Paisai's favor and gain the attention of the Tianfeng Grand Lord. But now, his plan had been ruined by an ant. The sword is the king of all weapons. It's a killing weapon, but in your hands, it has become a toy to show off and show off. Are you really a sword cultivator? Yi Guqin questioned coldly. Su Wenbin's face flushed red and his throat choked up. Yi Guchen's evaluation was based on the facts, not the person. Putting aside the friction between him and Su Wenbin, Su Wenbin's flashy swordsmanship alone made Yi Guchen impatient. He was simply using the sword as a tool to show off. For Yi Guchen, who viewed the sword as his life, this was enough to make him feel disgusted. Since you said that my swordsmanship is flashy, then what about yours? Su Wenbin's face was red from being questioned by Yi Guchen. He could not help but shout. One strike is enough to break your swordsmanship. Yi Guchen said coldly and stood up with his hands behind his back. All the prodigies in Qingfeng Garden felt their hearts skip a beat. Chapter 865. One strike is enough to break Su Wenbin's sword technique. How confident must he be to be able to say something like that? Zhuo Qiuqing, Zhen Lang, and the others were stunned. Although they were as famous as Su Wenbin, it was almost impossible for them to break Su Wenbin's sword technique with one strike, let alone an emperor-level sword technique. Nonsense. Do you think you're a prodigy on the sword roll? Su Jingjing could not help but glare at Yi Guchen. She had seen arrogant people before, but she had never seen someone so arrogant. If he was strong, it would be acceptable for him to be arrogant. However, such words came from a young man without any true energy cultivation base. It was so arrogant that it was annoying. He's just trying to please the crowd. Zhen Lang shook his head. Even he was not confident that he could break Su Wenbin's startling rainbow sword technique, let alone break it with one strike. It was a joke. Young Master Degu, don't be rash. Han Lingxian tugged at Yi Guchen's sleeve. She knew that Yi Guchen was talented in the way of the sword. However, this was the Sword Dynasty, not the Izumo Dynasty. His opponent was not a half-baked prodigy like Shen Mubai, but a true prodigy in the way of the sword. If I can't even break such a fancy sword technique, then I'm not worthy of being a sword cultivator. Yi Guchen shook his head with an indifferent expression. Sister Lingxian, your friend is really arrogant. Qin Paisai's pretty face was also filled with surprise. She could not figure out what gave Yi Guchen the right to say something like that. Haha, what a joke. This is the funniest joke I've ever heard. You can break my sword technique with one strike? Come up and try it. Su Wenbin was so angry that he laughed. His grip on his sword was even tighter. He admitted that he had indeed shown off a little when he was practicing his sword technique, making his sword technique look rather flashy and eye-catching. However, so what? Even so, Su Wenbin was confident that unless it was a prodigy on the sword roll, it would be difficult for anyone to break his startling rainbow sword technique. Yi Guchen walked up to the arena calmly. With a flick of his wrist, he took out a sword that he had bought casually. It was just an ordinary mystical runic divine weapon. Su Wenbin said with a cold face, in order to let you lose willingly, I will not use my true qi. When the time comes, don't say that I used my true qi to pressure you. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Wenbin swept out with his sword. The sword light was as bright and dazzling as a rainbow, almost blinding everyone's eyes. What a powerful sword force. Zhuo Qiuqing, Zhen Lang, and the others also looked carefully with tense expressions. Big Brother's swordsmanship is invincible. Su Jingjing was quite confident about this. Qin Paisai had a curious look on her face. The only person present who was worried about Yi Guchen was probably Han Lingxian. Yi Guchen's expression was calm and grave when he saw the dazzling sword light. Scared silly? Su Wenbin could not help sneering when he saw Yi Guchen standing there in a daze. Just as Su Wenbin's sword was about to land on Yi Guchen's body, Yi Guchen finally drew his sword. Swoosh! Yi Guchen flicked his wrist, and the tip of his sword vibrated. A sword light swept across like a twinkling star. Although there was no trace of true qi, the sword light seemed to illuminate the sky and cut through the stars in the sky. Clang! The ear-piercing sound of metal colliding burst forth. The crowd only felt a sword light sweep past like lightning. Then the scene froze. Everyone cast their gazes at the arena, and saw a scene that shocked them beyond belief. The tip of Yi Guchen's sword was pressed against Su Wenbin's neck. The atmosphere froze. The faces of the elites of Skywind Ridge were frozen with indescribable astonishment. Su Wenbin, who was considered a top genius in Skywind Ridge, was defeated in one move. Even the sword in his hand was sent flying out of his hand and fell off the stage. No one was able to react in time. What was going on? Qin Paisai was dumbfounded. She had originally wanted to watch the show, but the scene in front of her was completely out of her expectations. Han Lingxian was also very surprised. She felt a little dazed and like she was in a dream. Zuo Qiuqin, Zhen Lang, and the other geniuses were also in disbelief. As for the Su family, Su Hao's face turned pale as if he had been struck by lightning. Su Jingjing rubbed her eyes, thinking that she was hallucinating. However, when she looked again, it was still the same. This is impossible. Su Jingjing could not help but shout. On the other hand, young Master Yu, who had been hidden under the hood and ignored by everyone, was surprised. Although he did not take Su Wenbin seriously, he was still considered a genius. He did not expect his sword move to be so easily broken. The person who saw it the clearest was Qin Zhen, who was at the fifth heaven of the venerable realm. Could it be that there will be a day when I misjudge someone? Although this kid doesn't have any Zhen Qi or soul fluctuations, his proficiency in sword skills is astonishing. Qin Zhen's eyes revealed a look of surprise. In the beginning, he also thought that Yi Guqin was a grandstander. But now, it seemed that was not the case. In the arena, Su Wenbin's body was trembling. He was not afraid but angry. His face was ashen. He really only used one move. The star-like sword light was so fast that he did not even have time to react. In the blink of an eye, the sword in his hand was sent flying. Strange. Su Wenbin felt that the young man in front of him was very strange. However, just as Su Wenbin could not hold back his anger, and was about to unleash his true qi, Yi Guqin's sword was pressed tightly against Su Wenbin's neck. The cold blade caused Su Wenbin to have goosebumps all over his body. Why? Do you want to use your true qi? Yi Guqin's gaze was deep. Su Wenbin suppressed the anger in his heart and said coldly, "Am I such a person who goes back on his word? Don't show off such a sword skill." Yi Guqin slapped Su Wenbin's chest with his sword and blasted him out of the arena. Su Wenbin was so angry that his heart was about to explode. Shame. To him, this was an unprecedented humiliation. Qin Paisai's gaze turned to Su Wenbin, her gaze turning colder. She thought that Su Wenbin's sword skill was superb, but it turned out that it was just for show. Feeling her gaze, Su Wenbin clenched his fists tightly and his face turned purple. At this moment, Yi Guqin's gaze suddenly turned to Qin Zhen, who was sitting on the main seat. He said in a calm tone, "Tianfeng Lord, I want to make a deal with you. What do you think?" "Oh, let's hear it." Qin Zhen raised his eyelids. Yi Guqin did not show off his amazing sword skill, so Qin Zhen would not bother to answer him. However, Yi Guqin's performance did surprise him. Han Lingxian suddenly understood that the reason why Yi Guqin went to the arena to compete with Su Wenbin was not to show off his ability. He wanted to attract Qin Zhen's attention, and then propose a deal. It's very simple. I guarantee that in the 5 Academy selection, Tianfeng Ridge's geniuses will not be threatened by other regions' geniuses. Some of them will be able to enter the Academy smoothly. But in exchange, I need the Lord's sacred medicine Spirit Bodhi. As soon as Yi Guqin's voice fell, it set off a storm. No one had expected Yi Guqin to ask for the sacred medicine from Qin Zhen. As soon as he opened his mouth, "Don't you know your own identity and strength? You're really asking for too much," Su Jingjing reprimanded. Although Yi Guqin broke Su Wenbin's startling rainbow sword skill, that was under the condition that he did not use his true qi. Therefore, everyone disagreed with Yi Guqin's proposal. "You only broke one sword skill and you're already so smug?" Zhen Lang shook his head. However, at this moment, a faint arrogant voice sounded. "Sorry, this Spirit Bodhi, I want it." The hooded young Master Yu slowly took a step forward and said with a tone of victory. Chapter 866. This is. Inside the garden, a group of geniuses looked at the figure in a dark blue robe with a hood, their eyes filled with doubt. They had long noticed that the siblings Su Wenbin and Su Jingjing seemed to be rather respectful to that figure. But Su Wenbin did not take the initiative to introduce him, so no one went to talk to him. No one expected that at this moment, this figure would actually stand out and be determined to obtain the spirit Bodhi. Oh, the sacred medicine is indeed attractive, but there is only one spirit Bodhi, and it is a reward for the 5 Academy selection. Why should I give it to you in advance? Qin Jun said in a light tone. If not for the situation, how could Qin Jun be willing to take out the sacred medicine as a reward? It was just that in this 5 Academy selection, if no one from Tianfeng Ridge stood out, his position as the Lord of Tianfeng Ridge would come to an end, and he would be pulled down by his opponents. Haha, my lord, you will give me the sacred elixir because only I can help the Skywind Ridge safely pass the selection of the 5 academies, the mysterious young Master Jade said confidently. Oh, not only Qin Jun, but the other geniuses present also looked at young Master Yu in surprise. Where did this mysterious young master get the confidence to say such words? Seeing this, Su Wenbin took a step forward and flashed a fawning smile at Qin Paisai. Paisai, in order to help you and Uncle Qin, I've spent a tremendous amount of effort to find this extraordinary genius. Oh, he is? Qin Paisai looked at the man curiously. Young Master Yu, please show your true face. Su Wenbin was waiting for this moment. Young Master Yu, could it be? Many geniuses were shocked, as if they had guessed something, and held their breaths. That young Master Jade slowly pulled down his hood, revealing a handsome face. He looked valiant and exuded an imposing aura. A powerful aura of an 8th stage heaven and earth spirit bridge surged out at the same time, forming a true chi storm that swept in all directions, and even the calm surface of the lake was set off waves. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock when they looked at that face. It's young Master Yu, ranked 65th on the sword ranking, Yu Yuan Kuei. One of the prodigies exclaimed in shock. Sword ranking genius. In the entire sword dynasty, they were all famous existences. There were 100 geniuses on the sword roll. However, if the entire sword dynasty's 360 mountain ridges were evenly distributed, only one Heavens Chosen was born in 3 territories. Most of the geniuses on the sword rankings were gathered in the Sword Dao Alliance's aristocratic families, and the 5 great academies. There were very few prodigies left on the sword roll. No one in Qingfeng Garden had expected that Su Wenbin would invite a genius from the sword roll to attend the meeting. Moreover, it was Yu Yuan Kuei who was ranked 65th. Although this ranking could not be considered very high, it was definitely not low either. At least in the younger generation of the Tianfeng Ridge, no one could beat Yu Yuan Kuei, the genius of the sword list. Qin Jun's eyes were also slightly shocked. A genius on the sword roll was not intimidating to him. After all, as a venerable one, he could easily suppress a genius on the sword roll. However, if there was a genius on the sword list in the enrollment of the 5 academies, people from other regions would have to think twice before targeting Tianfeng Ridge. This time, Su Wenbin had really invited a savior for Tianfeng Ridge. He really is a genius on the sword list. Qin Paisai covered her mouth with her small hand. Her heart was also shocked. Han Lingshuan's face was slightly pale. If Yu Yuan Kuei had asked for the spirit Bodhi, with his status as a genius on the sword list, Qin Jun might have seriously considered it. Compared to Yu Yuan Kuei, Yi Guqin's status and strength were far inferior. Perhaps only a fool would choose Yi Guqin between the two. Now many people were looking at Yi Guqin with a playful look in their eyes. Hee, a cripple with no cultivation actually dares to boast that he can protect Tianfeng Ridge's geniuses. Why are you speechless now? Su Jingjing's words were merciless. Yi Guqin first beat up Su House, then broke Su Wenbin's sword technique with a sword. It could be said that he had embarrassed the Su family. Su Jingjing was also extremely disgusted with Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin did not argue. He remembered that when he was at the swordless shrine, he had also seen this young Master Yu. He did not expect him to be a genius on the sword list. Yi Guqin had recovered his cultivation, so it was not difficult for him to deal with Yu Yuan Kuei. It was just that his strength had not recovered yet, so it was not convenient for him to make a move. Lord, is there still a need to consider this matter? The sacred medicine will be taken out sooner or later. Give it to me as soon as possible. If I can break through to the 9th stage, Then I will have the strength to protect everyone. Yu Yuankui said arrogantly with his hands behind his back. Young Master Yu is actually going to break through to the 9th stage. The surrounding geniuses' expressions changed. They finally understood that Yu Yuankui wanted to obtain the spirit Bodhi to break through to the 9th stage. At that time, his position on the sword list would probably take a big step forward. Father, this might be the only way. Otherwise you. Qin Paisai's eyes were moved. If another accident happened this time, Qin Zhen might not be able to keep his position as lord. Qin Zhen thought for a moment, and seemed to have made a decision. Heavenly Wind Lord, I can also give it a try. Yi Guqin's tone was indifferent. He did not lower himself. It was just that when he saw this opportunity, he was unwilling to give it up so easily. If he could obtain the spirit Bodhi, Yi Guqin not only had the confidence to recover his cultivation, but also had the possibility of advancing further. If he could break through to the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge, then most of the geniuses on the sword list would have nothing to fear. Do you still have the right to speak here? Su Wenbin coldly reprimanded. Zhuo Qiuqing, Zheng Lang, and the others also looked at Yi Guqin with a strange expression. Yu Yuankui's identity had been revealed. What courage did Yi Guqin have to compete with the sword list geniuses for the sacred medicine? Even Qin Paisai tugged at the corner of Han Lingshuan's clothes and said, Sister Lingxian, let your friend rest. Now is not the time to cause trouble. But Han Lingxian bit her lips. She knew that if Yi Guqin wanted to recover from his injuries, he had to obtain the sacred medicine. No need to say any more. I have already made up my mind. Young Master Yu, this time, the geniuses of the Heavenly Wind Ridge are in your hands, Qin Zhen said. Haha, my lord's eyes are as bright as torches. I will not disappoint you. Yu Yuankui was not surprised at all. He cupped his hands and smiled faintly. Miss Han, let's go. Yi Guqin saw this and did not insist. Qin Zhen had eyes but could not see the jade. There was nothing he could do. Han Lingxian nodded slightly, and was about to leave with Yi Guqin. At this moment, Yu Yuankui looked over and smiled faintly. Oh right. Other than the sacred medicine, I want one more thing. What is it? Qin Zhen frowned slightly. I want her. Yu Yuankui pointed at Han Lingxian. Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows coldly. Chapter 867. The entire Qingfeng garden quieted down. Yu Yuankui pointed at Han Lingxian with an indifferent expression, as if he was choosing a treasure that he liked. Yi Guqin's expression was cold. Han Lingshuan's beautiful eyes were filled with anger. What did Yu Yuankui think she was? A commodity that could be obtained easily? Even Qin Zhen frowned and said, Young Master Yu, what do you mean? Nothing. I want the spirit Bodhi and this woman. As long as you agree, I can help Tianfeng Ridge. Yu Yuankui said arrogantly. Young Master Yu, she is my best friend. Qin Paisai's expression changed slightly. Yu Yuankui was not moved at all. With a playful smile he said, My lord princess, my words are here. As long as there is Ling Bodhi in this woman, leave the selection of the 5 academies to me. If there is one less, then I can't be bothered to care. Qin Paisai's expression froze as she bit her lips. Qin Zhen furrowed his brows. No matter what, he was still the lord of a ridge. If he forcibly tied a woman to Yu Yuankui, his reputation would be ruined. Young Master Yu, are you humiliating me? Han Lingxian was so angry that her face turned pale. She had thought that most of the geniuses on the sword list were magnanimous people. She did not expect that there would be someone as shameless as Yu Yuankui. This made Han Lingshuan's delicate body tremble. Isn't it better to follow me than to follow that useless person beside you? Yu Yuankui said arrogantly. Don't confuse you with young Master Dugu. Han Lingshuan's beautiful face turned cold as she reprimanded. Yi Guqin's eyes were cold. Although Han Lingxian and he had not known each other for long, they could be considered friends. Yu Yuankui's actions were really digging his own grave. I'm sorry, young Master Yu. We can agree to any other conditions, but Sister Lingxian is my best friend. If she does not want to follow you, we can't force her. Qin Paisai took a deep breath and said, she did have some principles. Although she wanted to rope in Yu Yuan Kuei, she didn't want to do it this way. Pacey, young Master Yu's request isn't too excessive, Su Wenbin said. From his point of view, exchanging a woman for Yu Yuan Kuei's help was simply worth it. That's right, Princess. Only by relying on young Master Yu can we have a chance against the Yellow Dragon Ridge and the Purple Smoke Ridge. Princess, you have to think about us too. Every time the 5 academies recruit students, we are targeted very badly. This time, young Master Yu is willing to help us. What's wrong with fulfilling his request? Qin Paisai seemed to have the intention to refuse. The other young talents in Qingfeng Garden also began to jeer. In their opinion, if not for Yu Yuan Kuei's help, they would have been completely wiped out this time. Qin Paisai was speechless for a moment. Han Lingshuan's gaze swept across everyone present. When those people met Han Lingshuan's gaze, they all looked away guiltily. Ha! Han Lingxian laughed bitterly. In order to win over Yu Yuan Kuei so that they could enter the 5 academies, this group of young talents from the Sky Wind Ridge did not hesitate to push her out. At this moment, Han Lingshuan's heart felt as if it had fallen into an ice cave. She felt an unprecedented loneliness. However, just as Han Lingxian was feeling helpless, a thin but tall figure stood in front of her. Young Master Dugu. Han Lingxian raised her head. When she saw this figure, her heart was moved and her eyes became slightly moist. This is the genius of the Skywind Ridge. Yi Guchen smiled coldly. What do you mean by this? That's right. You have no right to speak now. Don't think that you can be arrogant just because you were lucky enough to break young Master Su's sword move. Seeing Yi Guchen stand out and protect Han Lingxian, the group of geniuses felt a little awkward. This was because in comparison, they appeared to be very shameless. Therefore, they became even more angry and targeted. Are you really sword cultivators? For the sake of your own future, you can casually sacrifice a woman. Are you worthy of the swords in your hands? If the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty are all people like you, then I will be disappointed. Yi Guchen stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His cold words were like a clap of thunder that exploded in the Qingfeng Garden. All the young talents were stunned. Immediately, their faces flushed red and their ears turned red. Yi Guchen's words were undoubtedly tearing off their hypocritical faces. Ignorant ants. The name of the Sword Dynasty is not something that a cripple like you can slander, Su Wenbin scolded angrily. If the Sword Dynasty is all people like you, then it's fine if you don't come. Yi Guchen waved his hand and said coldly. Back then, Kempo sincerely invited Yi Guchen to join the Sword Dynasty and the Sword Alliance. Yi Guchen was a little curious. However, after seeing the scene in front of him, he was slightly disappointed. Of course, perhaps this was just a glimpse of the big picture. It could only be said that the geniuses of the Skywind Ridge were too unsightly. Princess, my patience is limited. If you really want to protect your best friend, then let's forget about this matter. Yu Yuan Kuei waved his hand. Young Master Yu, can't you change your conditions? Qin Paisai's face turned pale. Without Yu Yuan Kuei, it would be difficult for the Skywind Ridge to achieve anything this time. All right, Paisai. If you are still hesitating, then I can only tell you this news. Su Wenbin saw the situation in front of him, and his expression changed. What is it? The surrounding geniuses all held their breaths. Although young Master Yu is very humble and low-key and doesn't want to expose himself, under the current circumstances, he has no choice but to say it. I'm sure all of you know about the mysterious sword demon who has been causing a stir in the capital of Skywind recently, Su Wenbin said lightly. Of course we know him. He is the sword demon who has broken the moves of many geniuses on the sword ranking. He even broke Hua Wuxia's move. Yes, does young Master Su have news about the sword demon? Su Wenbin's words caused a stir in the atmosphere. Su Jingjing swayed her body and walked out. Her beautiful face was filled with admiration. She looked at Yu Yuan Kuei and said with great admiration. To be honest, the sword demon's real body is young Master Yu. What? Like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. All the geniuses in the Qingfeng Garden stared at Yu Yuan Kuei with their mouths agape. Their eyes were filled with extreme shock. The mysterious sword demon who had been the talk of the town recently was actually Yu Yuan Kuei? That day at the sword-ranking divine palace, it was us who brought young Master Yu there. At that time, other than him, who else had the ability to break the moves of the geniuses on the sword ranking? Su Wenbin said truthfully. That's right. We saw it with our own eyes. Young Master Yu has always been humble and low-key, so he is unwilling to admit it. Su Jingjing also added fuel to the fire. However, they didn't notice the embarrassment in Yu Yuan Kuei's eyes. These two idiots. Yu Yuan Kuei wanted to slap the Su siblings in his heart. That day he had said that it was a misunderstanding. In the end, the Su siblings had misunderstood him as modesty. But now, looking at the countless respectful and admiring gazes, Yu Yuan Kuei found it hard to explain. Chapter 868. This young Master Yu is the sword demon? Qin Paisai's body trembled, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. Previously, she had been feeling regretful. If she had been able to recruit the sword demon, the 5 academies selection would have been a cinch for the Tianfeng Ridge. However, the sword demon had disappeared without a trace, and no one knew who he was. Now the Su siblings were saying that Yu Yuan Kuei was the sword demon. With the Su siblings' reputation in the Tianfeng Ridge, they wouldn't lie, and Yu Yuan Kuei didn't refute. Everyone was almost certain that the sword demon was Yu Yuan Kuei. No wonder the sword demon is young Master Yu. That's right. It's been a long time since the sword demon appeared in the Tianfeng Ridge. There's no doubt that the sword demon appeared at the same time as young Master Yu. I didn't expect young Master Yu to be so low-key. He hid it from us. The geniuses in the garden couldn't help but look at Yu Yuan Kuei with admiration. Being able to break Hua Wuxia's sword move, even if it was just a shadow, was admirable. Oh, Paisai, you don't have any objections now, do you? Su Wenbin smiled faintly. Qin Paisai bit her pink lips and couldn't say a word. If it was only Yu Yuan Kuei, she could argue. However, with the sword demon's identity, even if she wanted to protect Han Lingxian, Qin Zhen wouldn't allow it. Sure enough, Qin Zhen's eyes lit up and he said, I didn't expect young Master Yu to be the sword demon. Since you have such strength, you are the best guarantee for the 5 academies selection. I agree. Father Yu. Qin Paisai wanted to say something, but stopped. Yu Yuan Kuei's eyes flashed. He didn't admit it, nor did he deny it. If he continued to make the same mistake, he would be able to obtain what he needed. He is the sword demon. Han Lingxuan's face was pale, and her lips were as white as paper. Her heart sank. With this identity, Yu Yuan Kuei's weight was undoubtedly heavier. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. He knew the truth. But who would have thought that Yu Yuan Kuei would safely substitute the plum tree for the peach tree? Thinking of this, Yi Guqin stepped forward and said in a calm tone, Yu Yuan Kuei, are you sure you are the sword demon? Audacious. What qualifications do you have to question young Master Yu? Su Wenbin berated. This person's jealousy is really scary. He's feeling down and can't bear to see others doing well. Su Jingjing crossed her arms in front of her chest and sneered coldly. When these words were spoken, many of the surrounding gazes were filled with disgust. Although Yi Guqin's sword strike had been stunning, it was still not enough. But in the end, it was only a sword technique and not his full strength. In the eyes of these prodigies, Yi Guqin was just a mortal who was proficient in sword techniques but had no cultivation. Even Qin Paisai, who had always been on Han Lingxuan's side, remained silent. Yi Guqin's words were indeed filled with jealousy. I believe in young Master Dugu. Han Lingxian stood beside Yi Guqin. You want him to save you. Of course you believe in him. One of the prodigies sneered disdainfully. Just as the situation reached a stalemate, suddenly, the sound of a flute drifted faintly. It was extremely ethereal, and carried with it a misty rain in Jiangnan. Hey, where did that flute come from? Everyone was surprised. Sword will. I can feel a trace of sword will in that flute. A young man said with a look of disbelief. A faint voice drifted over from afar. So you are the sword demon. What a surprise. Suddenly misty rain fell in Qingfeng Garden. On the surface of the sapphire lake, A thin figure stood abruptly. He wore a bamboo hat and a black veil fluttered in the wind. He stood on the surface of the lake like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, causing small ripples. His aura was not exposed, but it gave off a deep and serene feeling. Oh, he is? Everyone's eyes fell on the man in the bamboo hat standing in the middle of the lake. It's Yu Yanchoku. Yu Yuankue's expression changed slightly. Yanchoku. He is Yanchoku, ranked 40th on the sword roll. The crowd was in an uproar as the prodigy's eyes widened. What they had seen and heard today was like a dream to them. In the past Tianfeng grand banquets, there was not a single prodigy on the sword roll. But this time, there were 2 prodigies on the sword roll, and their rankings were not low either. Yanchoku was ranked 40th on the sword roll. He was even stronger than Yu Yuankue, who was ranked 65th. His real body is here? Yi Guchen looked up slightly. Previously at the Sword Roll Divine Palace, Yi Guchen had also cracked Yanchoku's Misty Rain illusory sword. It had to be said that Yanchoku was quite skilled in sword Dao. It was just that his opponent was Yi Guchen. Haha, Yanchoku, it's really surprising that you would appear in Tianfeng Ridge to participate in the Tianfeng banquet. However, I welcome you with open arms, Qinzhen said with a laugh. Although he did not know why Yanchoku had suddenly appeared here, if he could rope him in, then the 5 colleges' enrollment would be in the bag. I have always been a wanderer and have no fixed abode. I only came to Tianfeng Ridge by chance. But this time, I am not here to participate in the Tianfeng banquet, but for him. Yanchoku pointed his flute at Yu Yuankue. Everyone's expression changed. Could it be that there was some friction between the 2 prodigies on the sword roll? I didn't expect that my Misty Rain illusory sword would be cracked by someone. And that sword demon is actually you. I also saw the video recording in the Sword Roll Divine Palace. I didn't expect your sword skills to reach such a level. It seems that it won't be long before your ranking on the sword roll surpasses mine. Yanchoku said with a hint of admiration. Everyone was enlightened when they heard this. So Yanchoku was here to find Sword Demon who had cracked the Misty Rain illusory sword. That was equivalent to looking for Yu Yuankue. Yu Yuankue was stunned and did not know how to respond. He did not expect Yanchoku to come to Tianfeng Ridge. He also did not expect Yanchoku to come directly to the Tianfeng banquet. Yu Yuankue had always been arrogant because of his status as a prodigy on the sword roll. However, he was not qualified to put on airs in front of Yanchoku. There was a difference of 25 places between the 2 of them on the sword roll. This was already a huge gap. In Yu Yuankue's eyes, the prodigies of Tianfeng Ridge were like chickens and dogs. However, in front of Yanchoku, Yu Yuankue was also a chicken and a dog. Haha, of course. Young Master Yu has always kept a low profile. If we didn't speak up because we couldn't stand it anymore, I'm afraid you wouldn't know that Sword Demon is young Master Yu. Su Jingjing's face was full of pride as she puffed out her chest. However, she did not notice that Yu Yuankue, who was standing behind her, had a slightly unnatural expression. Only he knew that he was not Sword Demon. However, with the revelation of the Su siblings, Yu Yuankue had turned a blind eye and climbed up the ladder in order to obtain the sacred medicine Spirit Bodhi and Han Lingxian. He had never expected Yanchoku to come. That's great. I'm here today to prove the loopholes of the Misty Rain illusory sword. I hope, young master, you will not be stingy with your guidance. Yanchoku swung his flute, causing the entire lake to ripple. In the Misty Rain, Yanchoku's aura of a 9th stage spirit bridge of heaven and earth completely erupted. It suppressed all the prodigies present. Yu Yuankue's face turned stiff and pale, like the face of a dead person. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.